Ah, the Terminator, the third pillar of 80s sci-fi action franchises. The story of self-aware AI sending automated mechanical monsters disguised as human beings to the past to assassinate the immediate ancestry of pivotal figures from the inevitable war of man versus machine. One great movie, followed up by a masterpiece, and then it went completely off the rails. Watching Salvation, Genesis, and Dark Fate as a trilogy is completely incomprehensible, and no one could settle on a direction for where to go next. I thought this franchise was kind of dead, but that new anime came out and had some cool stuff in it, and while the movies have turned into a mess, this franchise has been consistently a huge name in gaming. For the 6 Terminator movies, there's over 43 appearances by the character in the world of video games, and we're going to do our best to cover every single one, unless we screw up and miss one. We're your hosts, Xavier Mendoza and Diego Rivera, and today we'd like to talk to you about our Lord and Savior John Connor and his highly inconsistent face. In lieu of a which is the best game discussion, let's answer instead. Is it better to play as the guy fighting the Terminator, or the Terminator itself? Let us know your answer, and by the end we'll give you ours. Stick around because we have a lot to go over. Cyberdyne Systems Model 109, Relay Mission Objectives.
I must scan historical data caches to better understand the past. Then I must travel back in time and prevent this future timeline from occurring, including my own construction.
Good. Let's get you started then.
The first Terminator video game was developed for DOS, and it is by a little studio known as Bethesda Softworks. Yes, that Bethesda. And for the Terminator's video game outing, Bethesda wasn't interested in developing a simple side-scroller that adapts the movie's plot in a linear fashion, as we'll go on to see many video games do in this retrospective. No, they had something far more ambitious in mind. They wanted to develop an experience that simulated the concept of being Kyle Reese on a critical mission to protect Sarah Connor from a relentless, remorseless, and deadly killing machine. Or being that cold hunter and using whatever means to track down your target and terminate them. Which means that you have a massive slice of LA packed into this game that you have to roam, explore, and comb through to gather any resources and information necessary to carry out your mission. And it is indeed a geographically accurate piece of real-life LA, with highways and overpasses taken out due to hardware limitations. Whenever you start up a new game, you spawn in a random location of LA, and from there on you have to prepare yourself for your mission by using the phone book to look up the locations of points of interest like gun shops to arm yourself, drugstores to pick up medical supplies you may need, or hospitals to get yourself patched up if you're playing as Kyle Reese. While you're doing all this, your opponent is also out there somewhere in the streets of LA decking himself out. You can feel the vision Bethesda had, but I think it's one that was too ambitious for its time. Let me point out the elephant in the room. This game is certainly not a looker. It runs at a terrible frame rate, and while it is impressive to have 3D graphics in an open world of this scale, I feel like I'm looking at one of those targeting systems in the original Star Wars trilogy. The UI is also just overbearing and kinda just intimidating to look at, though you can disable it and play the game in full screen, giving you a better view of these glorious graphics. Every aspect of this game feels overly obtuse and clunky. The simple action of walking down the sidewalk feels like a Herculean task with how slow you are. Driving requires you to change gears, which I think is actually a pretty cool detail, but again, the frame rate is at such a slow speed that judging when I should turn the wheel is a task that was trickier than I expected. There's also a wanted system whenever you go into stores and decide to steal items like weapons, armor, ammo, and hemorrhoid cream? I normally get appointed to the retro games in these retrospectives, but man, even I have my limits. I couldn't figure this one out. According to the manual, whenever you're close to your target, a green line will show up in your compass pointing you to their general direction, But after hours of wandering around LA, I just couldn't find Sarah Connor. I do really love the idea for this game though. With the remake craze showing no signs of slowing down nowadays, this is a concept for a Terminator video game that I think would be awesome to revisit with all the technical advances we've made over the years. Booting up the Terminator on NES, I was already filled with dread because I know how ball-bustingly difficult, clunky, and frustrating these retro games can be. But then I heard this intro music and couldn't help getting hyped as hell. What a jam! I was then treated to ominous 8-bit recreations of iconic Terminator scenes, setting up the story, and we're off to the races. Whoa, this is awesome! We have a run-and-gun side-scroller with tight controls, engaging platforming that is challenging but not frustratingly challenging. It's the kind that keeps you on your toes and motivates you to get better at the game because it fundamentally feels really good to play. It has that just one more try element that'll keep you glued to the game for hours. It's a cross between Mega Man and Contra, but something was rubbing me the wrong way. There's no way there's been an NES Terminator game this good that I had never heard anyone talk about. So I decided to do some research and found out that this is not a Terminator game, at least not entirely. Sunsoft was developing a Terminator game for the NES, but it unfortunately was cancelled for deviating too far from the plot of the movie, focusing on Kyle Reese in the future war and not having any levels that take place in the past. Rather than letting all the work they poured into this Terminator game go to waste, Sunsoft rebranded it as Journey to Silius. What you see now is a fan restoration of what would have been the NES Terminator video game, and they did a stellar job reworking sprites to be more Terminator appropriate and restoring things like the title screen and intro sequence. But, and not to demean this fan hack, we're gonna cover officially released Terminator games in this retrospective. This is the sad reality of the Terminator on NES. Developed by Radical Entertainment, this version of the Terminator does the exact opposite of all the things the Sunsoft version had going for it. Unresponsive and slidey feeling controls, frustrating platforming that requires pixel perfect accuracy, we've got baffling level design that makes you feel like you're being put through a paper shredder rather than playing a video game, and not a single jam to be found. Listen to this. To give the game some credit, it does accurately adapt the movie. Well, for the most part. Kyle Reese never dies and ends up being the one who terminates what the game calls the T-101. It's supposed to be the T-800. Cyberdyne Systems Model 101 is referring to the skin covering over the metal endoskeleton. So, Model 101 is Arnie's handsome mug. Hey man, you clicked on a Terminator Games retrospective, you're gonna have to put up with some actuallys here and there. But despite those discrepancies, you have all the major set pieces, like Kyle Reese making his way through the war-torn landscape post-Judgment Day, a chase sequence with a hunter-killer, running away from cops back in the 80s in a hobo's smelly jacket, rescuing Sarah Connor from the torn-up precinct, 2 vehicle chase sequences with the Terminator, and finally one last level in a factory where we make a Terminator panini. This is all cool, but the issue is that the game tries to do too many things and doesn't excel at any of them. It starts off as a shooter, which I thought was decent because the game does this thing with enemies where they kind of mirror your movements. They move when you move, and I thought that was an interesting way of translating the Terminator's perpetual hunt after you. So you have this system that has you strategically moving in a way that places the Terminators at an angle that you can shoot them at, since the game allows you to angle your shots in 3 different directions. But once you're done with the levels in the future, you never get to wield a gun in the game again. Instead, you have to punch and kick, which is accurate to the movies, but I thought the game had something going for it with its shooting mechanics. Wait, doesn't Reese get a shotgun at one point? The worst levels by far are the vehicle-based ones. The goal is to drive until this number on the side here diminishes to 0, but it doesn't work like a timer. it only goes down as you cover ground. But these driving controls are so bad that I'd rather surgically remove an eyeball in a dirty motel bathroom. How do they expect me to effectively make these tight ass turns at such high speeds while I simultaneously bounce around like a pinball? I also got stuck in the precinct level for longer than I should have because the game suddenly turns into an exploration, item hunting, puzzle based thing without any warning. I started the level and I walked in the opposite direction of where I started as you would in a side scroller, until I reached a dead end and stood there with my thumb up my ass. I didn't even know you could go through doors in this level. You're supposed to go into different rooms to find this yellow block and go down the right sequence of hallways and doors that take you to the top floor to then throw the yellow block at this open pit to use as a platform. How the hell was I supposed to figure that out? The last level in the factory is pretty straightforward, though it has one of the most seemingly easy but actually most demandingly precise jumps I've seen in a video game. Come on, it's right there. How can I not make this? The whole system of the Terminator mirroring your movement actually made for a pretty cool moment here. I reached the end of the level where that machine with the big press is at and stood behind it waiting for the Terminator to come at me. But he firmly stood his ground. I see what you're doing. You have to lure him into the machine by moving in a way that would force him to walk in the direction of it. I thought that made for a pretty cool final moment. Alright, come and get it, big guy. Fuck! Shit! Ha! First try. I'm not gonna lie to you. I used Skynet's advanced data saving software in order to beat this game because I don't know how the hell people were able to do so back in the day without any save states. Losing all your lives kicks you back to the beginning of the game, and that's a fate I wouldn't wish on anyone. The Terminator on the SNES is a considerable improvement from his older brother NES counterpart. It was released in April of '93 and was developed by Grey Matter. Once again, you play as Kyle Reese, but this one is more of a straightforward run and gunner, and because of that, it's consistently more enjoyable. You still have some special segments like a turret section and, once again, 2 god-awful vehicle levels. Much like the NES version, the goal is to consistently drive until this counter on the top reaches 0, whilst dealing with the Terminator shooting you from behind, and incoming traffic and road barriers at a near incomprehensible speeds. Like you'd expect, this game is also incredibly difficult, but I was surprised by how often the game would throw you a bone in the form of a health pickup or extra lives. Jumping into this one immediately after the NES version, it's easy to get swooned by the leap in graphics. There are more colors on display, sprites are more detailed, and you even have that parallax effect that gives the dreary future of 2099 some much appreciated depth. The final encounter with the Terminator has you running away from it in one of those auto-scrolling levels. You chip away at the D-Skin T-800's health bar by whacking it with a steel pipe. There's kind of a trade-off when it comes to being accurate to the movie's ending. The NES version very accurately portrays how the Terminator was destroyed in the movie, that being that big industrial press, but it's done so by Reese instead of Sarah, and he seemingly doesn't die. Here, we eventually reach Sarah, and she gives us an assist by tossing us a pipe bomb, and Reese heroically sacrifices himself in an explosion that destroys the Terminator. So, Sarah at least has a hand in destroying the Terminator, and Reese dies, but no big industrial press thing. You can't have it all, I guess. The Terminator on SNES is one I'd more confidently recommend from the games covered so far, but once again, use those save states. The Game Gear. I don't often get the chance to talk about this absolute unit of a system. Look at the size of this thing. I was pretty impressed to see some color on a handheld system from all the way back in the early 90s. That being said, this is probably the most stripped down version of the Terminator. Once again, being a straightforward shooter with itty bitty bite-sized levels that don't take you more than a minute or so to beat. Actually, I think I was able to beat this game in a single sitting no longer than a half hour maybe? Probably also due to the fact that there aren't any godforsaken vehicle levels. Sheesh, thank God. This one has some cutscenes that try their hand at realistic renderings of Sarah and Reese, and yeah, try to sleep with this image in your head tonight. I kid. No, but something that actually kept bugging me was that they kept spelling John Connor's name like this. Come on, how do you let that slip by? This is humanity's savior, show some respect.
Terminator Genesis? Oh, Terminator for the Genesis.
Yeah, we're not there yet. I actually played this one out of order, at least not the order that I prefer. I like to play the flagship home console versions first, then the usually lesser versions found on handhelds. Terminator for the Sega Genesis is essentially the same version as the Game Gear one, just a hell of a lot better looking. Having played the slightly clunkier Game Gear version helped out immensely because the Genesis one controls a lot better and the level design is more or less the same, so it made for a much smoother experience. Okay, I really played these games out of order. Or maybe the correct order, since playing the adaptations of the first movie has been an upward experience. Just when I thought I was done with these, I found out that there's a Sega CD version too. This is definitely the best one of these. It has the crispest graphics with vibrant colors and these parallax effects in a couple levels. Also, Kyle's jacket is a lot flowier. Look at how majestic that is. Controls feel the best here with responsive jumps that make these platforming sections a load of fun. Kyle moves really fast here compared to the other games, making this one feel more actiony. But without a doubt, the best part of the Sega CD was this add-on's ability to play full motion video and higher quality music, making this the only version of the Terminator game to play clips ripped straight from the movie. Look at this, I can barely tell what's happening. I love it. All kidding aside, this is pretty cool and impressive for a console to do in 1993. The music cannot go without praise. Every single track in this game is an absolute jam. My favorite track is the one that remixes dialogue from Kyle Reese, appropriately played in the tech noir level. That's hysterical and friggin' genius. So, now that I've played every version of the Terminator, I'd say that this is the definitive version, at least of the side-scrolling ones. It does everything exceptionally well, and it's pretty easy to get through, even though it doesn't offer continues. The next game in the series of Bethesda-developed Terminator games is Terminator 2029. We got an advanced review code 5 years before everyone else, no big deal. Starting this one made me give out an audible gulp because, god damn it, look at this UI. Am I playing as a guy or controlling a goddamn Gundam? Surprisingly though, this one isn't nearly as obtuse as the last Terminator game on DOS. You play as a self-insert TechCom soldier with the codename Iron Wolf. You take orders from John Connor as he sends you out on a variety of missions, ranging from search and destroy type objectives to rescue operations. What makes this game special is that you don't just play as a soldier in rinky-dink military fatigues and basic shoulder padding. You have a badass Mandalorian-looking battle armor that you can customize with all sorts of weapons and gadgets. See, that's why you have this cluttered UI. The Resistance fighters were able to recover this combat assault unit from one of Skynet's outposts and are now using it to turn the tide of war. Before you head out on missions, you get to pick out your loadout. Your armor is limited to 6 slots, and with them you can equip different weapons like plasma rifles, grenade launchers, and missile launchers, as well as more defensive equipment like armor and self-repairing modules. Your selection is very limited at first, but as you complete missions, this lovely fellow Resistance fighter, who I will keep a completely professional relationship with, provides you with new equipment to wipe out enemies with. I was really impressed with how much meaningful customization this game provides. What loadout you pick can drastically change your playstyle. You can choose to dedicate most of the slots in your suit for armor, thus quite literally making you a walking tank. You can deck yourself out with missiles and grenades to make easy work of any structures you might have to destroy, or have a more rounded loadout to be ready for any situation. The game is played from a first-person perspective, but the way you navigate is based on a grid system like those old dungeon crawlers. There's no smooth locomotion movement like Doom or Wolfenstein or anything like that. So positioning yourself to shoot enemies can be a bit tricky at times because they are able to move more naturally. You have to anticipate where they're going to be in relation to your position so you can snap your POV to the best angle. Thankfully, actually shooting your gun is something that resembles today's standards. It is as simple as aiming the cursor with the mouse and clicking away. But you have to be cautious that you don't overheat your phased plasma rifle in the 40-watt range. Other weapons like the lock-on missiles require you to scan your field of view for valid targets, but I'm not the biggest fan of those weapons because I always feel like they just leave me wide open for attacks. And that's the biggest issue I had with this game. Engaging with enemies always felt like a toss-up. Because you're not able to dodge incoming fire as you would in a game like Doom, Like, this game has that hit scan system, I believe it's called, right? Incoming projectiles are not a physical thing that occupies space within the game. If the enemy triggers its attack and you're in its line of sight, then you're hit. So facing enemies head on always felt like a gamble. Maybe they'll stand there brain dead for a few seconds, allowing me to get some free hits in, or maybe they'll do significant damage to me and set me up for failure later on in the level. You can use the environment to your advantage at times. Enemies seem to be unable to shoot through these barbed wires, and sometimes I was able to shoot through openings in rubble, but it was still kinda janky. The health system is pretty interesting. Rather than having a standard health bar, your health is represented by this damage status on your suit, broken up into different body parts. You've probably seen something like this in the Fallout games. Whenever that body part gets damaged, so does whatever attached weapon or equipment you have there, thus making it less effective. I believe that if you take damage to your helmet, that'll scramble your map, and I thought that was really cool and kind of immersed me in the experience because the map is vital. You can run a self-repair sequence, but this thing can take quite a while, so you gotta make sure you're in a safe space. I really like how objectives are handled here. Rather than giving you a map with a waypoint or marker, you have to go through your orders, and sometimes they'll have coordinates attached to them. You gotta use your heads-up display that tracks your current coordinates, and just keep navigating the level, keeping an eye on those coordinates until you reach the right ones. It gives you this feeling of, well, kind of being a soldier as you follow this information given to you. I wish games did this kind of thing today, rather than putting a big old arrow on your compass or a literal trail on your minimap. My favorite part of this game was the headquarters you hang out in between missions. Just look at these aesthetics. This is so freaking good. It's just oozing with style, man. I'd take this over hyper-realistic graphics any day. I love the colors, goofy faces, and the overall crunchiness of this game's graphics. Here you can keep track of your stats like how many enemies you've killed, your hit percentage, and read descriptions of all the different enemies. Look at those 3D models, look at them! Here is also where I listen to some of the most perplexing voice acting I've ever heard. I swear it's AI, but it can't be. This game came out in '92, but just listen to how the cadence of this dialogue completely shifts mid-sentence.
This grenade upon impact fires off 8 grenadelets. Each grenadelet isn't as powerful as a regular fusion grenade.
Why does that happen? It sounds like the type of thing you'd hear an AI-generated voice do. Did they use different takes and splice them together? Were the voice actors that bad? Or is it the work of Skynet? Oh man, I better move on to the next game before they get me. T2, the arcade game. Man, I have vivid memories of playing this game through that MAME emulator program on my uncle's computers back when I was 12 years old. And it's how I'll be playing it today because I don't want to spend $700 on one of those arcade one-up machines. Tempting, but I already have an X-Men one. This quarter-munching machine is a light gun rail shooter that takes you through Uncle Bob's journey of getting to the time displacement machine alongside John Connor. Then, some of the set pieces of the movie, like the destruction of Cyberdyne and the final battle against the T-1000. Even playing this thing on an emulator where you can cheat using a mouse, it's apparent how unfair this whole game is and how it is designed to just eat away at your allowance. You get helplessly bombarded by everything. There's just everything happening. Why are these guys throwing piss at me? You better go punch a payphone if you want any chance at beating this thing. It's cool to see this game take some liberties with enemy designs for the sake of variety, like these Snake Terminator things. Actually, something like this will go on to show up in Terminator Salvation. The characters are portrayed by their respective digitized actors. Well, everyone except Linda Hamilton for some reason. Sarah Connor was instead played by stunt actress Debbie Evans. But you could have fooled me. What's cool is that all the footage needed for this game's sprites was recorded on set alongside the actual Terminator 2 movie. I don't know if any other game has ever done something like this before. Maybe Street Fighter the movie, the game? I cheated my way through the game using unlimited credits, but even with that, I hit a wall that I was just unable to get past. The second to last level has you defending this truck from the T-1000's helicopter. If he manages to land just one hit on the truck, it's an immediate failure. You have to shoot the helicopter to very briefly thwart it away, but when it flies in, it does so from random locations, and if you don't shoot it immediately, then it's back to square one. It is so unforgiving. Even Eddie Furlong is like, you seeing this shit? Ugh, maybe I'll fare better in some of the ports that this game got. Let's check them out. The SNES version adapts the arcade game pretty accurately, while scaling down the amount of enemies on screen significantly. And in my opinion, this is for the better. It just makes for a more enjoyable experience. The arcade game is just too chaotic. I feel like the only thing I can do is spray and pray. The waves of enemies here are much more manageable, while still keeping the game challenging. This is also much more appropriate for a home console. I get why they make the arcade game so impossibly difficult. Like I said, gotta munch those quarters. But here I felt like I actually stood a chance. The SNES version also supports peripherals like the Super Scope and the Super NES mouse to click those heads with. Alright, so the helicopter in this version flies in at a speed that doesn't require you to have the augmented eyeballs of a super soldier, so I was able to get past it. Ah shit, there's a truck now? The boss fight with the T-1000 is pretty cool. You gotta shoot the giant tank of liquid nitrogen behind him to lower his temperature. But you gotta stay on top of it because whenever the liquid nitrogen is not pouring on him, his temperature slowly rises back up. After that, we move on to the platform by the big pit of lava, where we shoot at him some more to push him over the edge. These close-up shots of Robert Patrick are so good. There's actually 2 endings you can get in this game, depending on whether or not you destroyed enough computers in the Cyberdyne levels. If you did, then humanity is safe from Judgment Day, and if you didn't, well, I'm sure you can piece it together. You guess which one I got? Alright, so the Sega Genesis version is... okay, hold on. Do I really have to go through all of these? They're all the same game, okay? Yeah, they all look a little different because all these consoles have different specs, but in all of these, you scroll to the right and you point and shoot at whatever's on screen. The Genesis version looks like this, the Master System version looks like this, the Game Gear version looks like this, the Amiga version looks like this, the DOS version looks like this, and the Game Boy version looks like this. I feel sorry for the poor kid that had to settle for this one. Can we move on to the next game now? I have like 15 games left to cover.
You're getting your ass kicked.
Oh god. Terminator 2 for the DOS is a goddamn nightmare, man. It's pretty much a collection of minigames that not a single one is fun. At least I imagine they aren't fun because I couldn't get past the second level. But judging from the footage I watched, it doesn't look like I'm missing out on much. The first one is the saddest excuse for a fighting game I've ever experienced. You fight the T-1000 and it's pretty much a toss-up for whoever comes out victorious. You inch your way to each other and then throw punches like a sock'em rock'em robots. You also have a gun that you can use here, but it only has like 5 bullets or so, and the T-1000 often dodges your shots, so that's fun. The next level has you riding away in a motorcycle from the semi-truck, and it was impossible for me to get past this. Between the weird hit detection and lightning fast reflexes required to dodge incoming obstacles, this was one of the most frustrating experiences I've been through. Oh, also, whatever health you're left with at the end of the previous stage, that's what you'll start with here as if things weren't difficult enough. The rest of the minigames are a joke. One looks like you have to match the pattern inside the T-800's exposed arm. Another is a tile moving puzzle. The shooting level looks like it takes 3 button presses to get through. Oh god, another vehicle level, please get it away. Oh, and they reused the fighting game sections against the T-1000 like 3 times. Whoever beat these kinds of games back in the 90s is simply built different because I could never. Like this guy whose footage I had to use. Hats off to you, you poor bastards. Alright, back to basics, thank god. In Terminator 2 for NES, we take control of Uncle Bob in a straightforward platformer. The first level has us taking on waves of bikers until we make it to the bar, where we fight a boss who I think is supposed to be that one guy Uncle Bob steals his outfit from. Acquired clothes, boots, and motorcycle. Oh, it is! Wait, so what the hell am I wearing here? What's the matter, Nintendo? Didn't have the balls here to have Uncle Bob hanging dong for the first level? You could have at least given him these funky swim trunks. Oh god, not a vehicle level. Okay, I know you can't not have the motorcycle chase sequence in the T2 tie-in game. It's one of, if not the most iconic action sequence in the movie, but my god does this level suck. I thought the ones from Terminator 1 were bad. This one takes the cake so far. This level lasts, I don't know, a minute and a half maybe? But I sat here for 2 hours trying to beat it. The speed at which you ride is so fast as you try to avoid boxes, oil slicks, and car wrecks. Not only that, but you also have to shoot the semi-truck behind you rapid fire dead center. Otherwise it'll take you out quicker than you can say mimetic polyalloy. And it's tough hitting the shots that you need to in order to temporarily thwart the semi-truck when the windows between obstacles are so brief. You can't lose focus for a single second if you don't want to burn through your lives. If you do, you guessed it, it's back to the beginning of the game. Well, I managed to get through this level at the cost of a few years of my lifespan. The next one has us rescuing Sarah Connor from the psychiatric hospital. I thought this level made for a pretty cool parallel when you think back to the levels adapting the precinct shootout scene from the first movie, where our goal is to rescue Sarah Connor as you make your way through a maze of different floors and hallways. At this point, you'll also run into the T-1000 in all his liquid metal glory. But fret not, you can keep him at bay by pumping him with lead, though you can't get careless because ammo is limited. I love this. If you kill the security guards in this level, you get minus points, so it's in your best interest to shoot them in the legs and avoid pissing off John Connor. I thought that was a really cool detail. The next level has us infiltrating the Cyberdyne offices, where we have to find barrels scattered throughout the level to then deposit them into a designated spot. But you can only carry 3 barrels at a time, so you have to keep in mind where the barrels you come across are located to then backtrack to them and pick them up. Even though this game is a simple side-scroller, it does a good job of keeping levels varied by having different objectives and level layouts. The last level in the steel mill has a strong emphasis on platforming and avoiding environmental hazards like dripping lava and scalding steam. There are a couple of encounters with the T-1000 here that are admittedly way too easy and underwhelming. He barely puts up a fight, but man, I really love the sprite work of his liquid metal form contorting after you pepper him with bullets. The final encounter with him is a little less straightforward. Your weapon is taken away, so simply shooting him is not an option. You have to push him underneath either of these big containers that are pouring lava. I think the game wants you to punch him into it, which takes longer and is riskier since you can leave yourself open to attacks, but I found the Super Mario approach of just jumping on his head to be far more effective. With that, the T-1000 is destroyed, but it is not over yet. There's still one chip left that must be destroyed. God damn it. Even in 8-bit graphics, it still gets me. Alright, let's leap forward a generation and... Good grief, he's naked! Alright, now this is what I'm talking about. This is what 16 bits were made for. Terminator 2 Judgment Day for the SNES really took me by surprise. I saw a couple of people online talk about how playing it was an absolute nightmare back in the day. So, as per usual, I was ready to get my balls kicked in with unrelenting difficulty and countless game over screens. But I was actually impressed with the direction LJN took with this version of Terminator 2. Rather than being a straightforward shooter slash platformer a la Contra or Mega Man, this game has a lot in common with point-and-click adventure games. You don't simply walk to the right and achieve a level complete screen. Each level has specific objectives, and you have to thoroughly explore and interact with the environment in a way that doesn't feel obtuse or puzzling, maybe with 1 or 2 exceptions. Don't get me wrong, combat is still a big component in this game, but it's not always necessary. For example, after interacting with this phone booth in the first level to find out where John Connor lives, the next level will take you to his foster parents' home. Here you have to search the house for John Connor's ID card to get a profile on him, as well as coincidentally listen to a voice message left by the most goated best friend in cinema history that lets us know where John Connor will be hanging out. Now, when I first infiltrated the house, I completely missed this home alarm system that activates if you just walk in. As you search the house, you'll be pestered by cops, and even the T-1000 will show up. It doesn't fail the mission, it's just something that you have to deal with. But if you happen to notice the alarm system and shoot it, you can peacefully rummage through the house without any disturbances. That's friggin' awesome! It's very, what do they call those? Immersive sims? Yeah. Every level also has a certain number of T-800 pieces you have to collect. At first, I kinda wished that the game treated this as an optional objective, but ultimately I came to appreciate it because it made me explore each level that much more thoroughly, and having the one main objective would have just made the game too easy. There were a couple of instances where completing an objective didn't feel the most intuitive. Like when I found John Connor in the arcade, I didn't know how to get him to follow me, so I thought there was something I needed to do before approaching him. All I had to do was press the start button, and lo and behold, there's a command to ask him to follow you. Funnily enough, there was a part later on that my knowledge of the T2 movie came in clutch. In the Cyberdyne level, I came across this door I was supposed to go through, but pressing up on the D-pad as I normally would to go through doors wasn't doing anything. So again, I wandered around wondering if there was something I was missing, until I noticed this keypad thing by the door, and I recalled that scene where John Connor hacks the door the same way he hacked the ATM machine earlier in the movie. So I went to the start menu and switched off John Connor's follow command, and he immediately started working on the door. The game never hinted that your companions would be able to interact with stuff in the environment, at least not that I know of. If it did, then I completely missed it. This was a conclusion I came to solely because I watched the movie, and I think that's kinda cool. Your companions have their own hit points, and keeping them safe can get tricky later on when they bring in these grenade shooting drones and a shit ton of SWAT teams. If John or Sarah dies, Uncle Bob takes a knee and that time bubble thing forms around him. It looks like he's getting transported back to the future, but that's not right. You can't travel forward in time, it's a one-way trip. What Uncle Bob should actually do is perhaps get ahead of things since he knows Judgment Day is coming in just 2 years. Maybe start making preparations for the Resistance to give them a leg up against Skynet. You know, gather weapons and rations, put together a bunker, or maybe he'll go around and try to recruit people and convince them of the incoming future war, using himself as proof. Or maybe he'll just fuck off and start selling curtains. In between levels, you have these pseudo open world driving sections where you gotta follow this compass to your next destination. These were easily the most frustrating parts of the game because, unsurprisingly, the driving controls aren't the most intuitive. Your vehicle picks up speed really fast and it's tough to react in time to incoming traffic. Occasionally, you'll also have to deal with cops trying to ram you off the road, making you helplessly bounce around, and that just wasn't a good time. Making turns is also really weird. When you reach an intersection, you have to press the Y button, then pick the direction you want to turn. But if you're not in a particular spot in the intersection, the game won't allow you to turn, and I just think there was a better way to do this. And again, sometimes your vehicle speed is just so fast that it's really easy to miss a turn. The end of the steel mill level was another part where thinking back to the movie helped out a lot. This level might be the biggest in the whole game. It has multiple sections, a bunch of different doors you can go through, and staircases to climb. After collecting the T-800 pieces, the objective I had left was to destroy the T-1000. I knew that the scene where the T-1000 gets shot up and pushed into the lava shows Sarah, John, and Uncle Bob all on the same platform. So this has to be the spot. And yeah, after a few seconds, the sneaky little bastard shows up and it was hasta la vista, baby. But not before one final encounter in his goopy form that looks really cool. For some reason, Uncle Bob doesn't have Sarah or John lower him into the lava and again does that time bubble thing. Even though the NES version did it, what's up with that? I really like Terminator 2 Judgment Day on SNES. It was cool to see LJN try something different and not just simply make a side-scrolling shooter, but instead make levels a little more interesting with specific objectives, whilst accurately adapting key moments from the movie. But my god, what is up with the music in this game? It's this one looping, goofy ass, and incredibly out of place track for 90% of the game. The game eventually plays the theme from the movie in the final level. I would have taken that as the one track over this fucking circus music sounding ass thing. Terminator 2 for the Sega Genesis is pretty much the same as the SNES version with some minor differences. Most obvious being the audio and visuals. I prefer the ones on SNES, there's just more detail and shades of color. There are also different controls for the vehicle sections. On the Genesis, you get full range control to turn in any direction at any given time, which feels more natural. Though being able to strafe on the SNES made avoiding other vehicles a little easier. Ultimately, I'd recommend the SNES version over the Genesis one. Terminator 2 for the Game Boy. This one takes an interesting turn right at the beginning with Sarah Connor monologuing about the struggles between the machines and the Resistance. She starts detailing a mission with John Connor destroying a force field around Skynet to gain entry. And we do in fact take control of John Connor in this first level, making this one of the few games where we get to play as the prophesized leader himself. These first few levels show you how John Connor programmed the T-800 to protect his younger self in the past. First, we have to destroy these generators in a specific order to take down the shield encasing Skynet's main HQ. Once we're in, we make our way to the storage unit to pick up our future Uncle Bob, or past Uncle Bob rather, and reprogram him via a set of hacking minigames. You gotta align these circuits to create a clear path before the timer runs out. Are you kidding me? This is cake. Holy shit, that's a lot of lines. With the T-800 switched on to friendly mode, we send it back in time and... what the hell? We immediately jump to the motorcycle chase? No biker bar or mall level? Huh, okay. Thankfully, this motorcycle level is leagues easier than the one on NES. Next up is... retrieving the T-800 arm from the Cyberdyne building? Okay, hold on. If we're following the same pattern as the other games, then the next level is... yeah! The steel mill! Holy crap, this is a short-ass game. Each level takes no more than 3 or 4 minutes to beat, and there's only 5 of them. This game is like 15 minutes long. What a rip! The final showdown against the T-1000 has you pushing him back by punching him and using weapons that spawn in until you reach the end of the catwalk, and he falls over the pit of lava. Jesus, what was the team composed of for this game? Like 4 people? Yeah, it actually was. Hasta la vista, baby. Okay, now that's how you end the Terminator 2 video game. Fair enough. Terminator 2 Chess Wars. It's Terminator but chess. What do you want from me? Alright, there are a few things you can do, like customize the music and background. Yeah, I like this one. The chess pieces all represented by characters and robot models from the movies. The black chess pieces are Skynet and the white are our heroes from the movie. I was expecting certain pieces to have unique animations when you move them, but they either just walk or get teleported by that time displacement portal bubble thing. Like man, what a missed opportunity to have John Connor skid across the chessboard on his dirt bike. He's already sitting on it. Why wouldn't you do that? Whenever a chess piece gets taken out, they play this animation like you're in a bowling alley or something. This just doesn't feel like a practical way to play chess. These animations go on for far too long and I imagine they would just impede the pace of the game. Or maybe not. Chess is a slow-paced game anyway, so maybe these animations are just more time to think. Look, I don't play chess. I never learned how to play chess. I hate to disappoint you, Arnie, because I know you're an avid chess player, but this just isn't for me. You guys think Arnold ever loaded this thing up on his DOS machine? He probably doesn't even know it exists.
Fuck Scotty Scheffler.
What's that supposed to be?
It's for the Every Tiger Woods game review.
But that's not the costume we agreed on.
It counts, I have proof.
You're supposed to be dressed as Scotty Scheffler.
I'm not wearing that
Why do you
shit. Fuck
always
Scotty
change the
Scheffler.
costume
You know how
last
much
minute?
blood, sweat, and
Last
tears
year
my
you were
entire
supposed to be
family put
RoboCop,
into
but then you
this.
decided on hell.
Live with me if you wanna come.
Whoa, the Road Warrior.
I come from a possible alternate future that I've been programmed to prevent.
How far into the future are you from?
1 month.
Ooh. Was it the election?
What is an election?
Thank God. Yo! I love how this and the Alien vs. Predator game came out around the same time. I wish we'd do more crossovers from movie franchises as games. My dad used to have a copy of that comic about this matchup too, and I always imagined when I was little that it must have been based on some movie that I hadn't seen because there were so many at the time. It's a shame old Murphy and Uncle Bob didn't get a proper cinematic battle, but it's been so cemented by the tie-in material that I always see them as slightly adjacent characters. It's crazy how we currently live in a version of the future that's a middle ground between these two. Corporations and evil AI have taken over at the same time.
Hey, weren't we supposed to do something with this Robo guy? Review his games or something? Whatever. This game's story premise is based on the 4-issue comic crossover where Skynet's sentience was sparked by coming into contact with RoboCop. Since Alex Murphy's human brain is able to interface with computers, he acted as a sort of bridge that gave Skynet its self-awareness. In the future, the Resistance finds this out, so they send one of their soldiers to the past to destroy RoboCop. And Skynet follows suit by sending multiple Terminators to protect RoboCop from the Resistance soldier. I love that RoboCop has no idea this is going on. He's just working another Tuesday, following his prime directives, blasting creeps away, completely oblivious to the fact that he's the key to humanity's extinction. And what we have here is another side-scrolling shooter with some platforming here and there, and the occasional boss fight. RoboCop is like a perfect character for this type of game, which is probably why he has a couple of them. He feels appropriately heavy and tanky even when you're jumping on platforms and shimmying along pipes. Blasting away creeps is fun, but can get a bit tedious since more often than not, this game has levels that have infinitely spawning enemies, unless you push your way through to the next screen. Of course, you have your trusty Auto 9, but what you're really gonna want to use are those extra powerful weapons you pick up along the way, like an Ed 209's mounted gun, the Seeker with its missiles that automatically make their way to enemies, and plasma guns. If you die, you'll start back at the beginning of the level, and any weapons you picked up will be taken away. You'll be left with just your standard Auto 9, so it's really rewarding to go long stretches without dying. I like that the story is told through comic book panels as a way to reference the source material, but man does the text move at a snail's pace. At certain points, you'll run into Terminators, and while there are some that'll eventually go boom after bombarding them with firepower, there are some that can only be taken out by using the environment, like pushing them off ledges or into power grids. After we're done making our way through OCP's forces, RoboCop uses his spiky arm hacking thing on their systems and springs a trap set by Skynet. He succumbs to Skynet's trap and his mind is used for an orbiting self-defense system that becomes self-aware. RoboCop is helplessly forced to watch humanity fall as decades pass. Eventually, he catches an opening in Skynet's software that allows him to break free from their enslavement. He takes control of a factory where he builds himself a new body and weapon. Now mobile, RoboCop fights back against Skynet. But first, I get battered around like a punk because all I have is this measly Auto 9 again, and it's useless against Terminators. The game has a massive difficulty spike from this point on because all the enemies are Terminators now, and these guys can take a beating. It's best to just knock them on their ass and run away while they get back up. The game was surprisingly generous when it came to health drops, so I can't complain too much. But still, this should have been called RoboCop vs. Terminators because there's so goddamn many of them. After making our way through the remnants of humanity and this first-person Mode 7 level that I honestly could have done without, we reach Skynet's core for the final boss fight. I found this representation of Skynet amusing with how prophetic it is. In Terminator Salvation, Skynet would be represented as a big omniscient head on a computer screen, and in Terminator Genisys it takes the form of these blue holograms. So this blue electric head is pretty much a mix of those two. The boss fight was pretty tough because there are points where you're getting blasted from every direction and you've got Terminators dropping in between phases. With Skynet's core destroyed, we hightail it out of there. Well, I don't know if RoboCop can hightail it out of anywhere with his big heavy titanium ass. But now it's up to Robo to help rebuild humanity and continue to follow his prime directives. Have you ever seen a more badass image? John Connor who? Aw geez, there's a Genisys version too? Well actually this one's better than the SNES version. This one plays a lot faster and is generally more of a satisfying shooter with tougher enemies, more violence, and frequent bosses. Levels are also a lot less linear with power-ups tucked away in secret areas, and they offer side objectives like rescuing hostages to contribute to your score. Both versions of RoboCop vs. Terminator look great, but I think the Genisys version looks a bit better to me. Sprites and levels look more detailed and have more contrasting colors. What's weird is that pretty much the entire story is given to you at the beginning of the game in this giant block of text. that's not very imaginative. Both versions of these games are pretty good, but if I had to recommend one, I'd say go with the Genesis version. Just be prepared to take on a challenge because these later levels really bombard you with enemies. Terminator Rampage. On paper, this game sounds like a surefire success. It's a straight up Doom clone, and with how much of an action-packed franchise the Terminator is, this sounds like a no-brainer. We've had tons of these before, and even today it's still a very popular genre in the indie space. Yeah, well, talk about fumbling the bag because this game is atrocious. The game opens with the Resistance taking out Skynet Central Command, which is a big satellite station for some reason. Unbeknownst to them, an escape pod containing what the game refers to as a metanode, which is a modified T-800 containing a memory chip with all of Skynet's vital data, latches off the station and travels back to 1984. It lands in the Gobi Desert, then makes its way to the Cyberdyne facility, where it downloads all the required data to make Skynet self-aware. Jump 4 years later and the machines have taken over. However, John Connor sends another poor bastard back in time to destroy the metanode, and our stage is set. There is so much wrong with this game, but let's start with what's most apparent. This game has to be the biggest eyesore I've experienced. There have been very few times where I got a headache from just looking at a video game for a few minutes, and this game managed to do that in record time. This game's frame rate is so bad that I had to take a break every so often in fear that I might suffer a stroke. I believe that strapping someone down to a chair and taping their eyelids open and force them to watch a long play of this game could be an effective form of torture. Not only is the frame rate bad, but the game's color palette is painfully dull, often being just different shades of grays and browns. It activated that part of my brain that just makes me sad, man. I appreciate that crunchiness found in pixel graphics, but the crunchiness of these assets depicting office furniture and foliage is just too much. It reaches a level that you can't even comprehend what you're looking at. So, the core of the game is exploring different levels, gathering resources like new weapons, armor, ammo, and key items to open the door to the next level. Now, the problem is, just look at this map. Look at that mess of hallways and doors and rooms that have no rhyme or reason to their layout. When I first started this game and just glanced at the minimap, I knew I was in for some bullshit. This looks like someone took a sheet of paper, drew out the layout for a level with some thought and structure behind it, then took that sheet of paper, put it into a paper shredder twice, once lengthwise, then once widthwise, pissed on it, and asked the office intern to put it back together to the best of their ability. This game's level design is infuriating. Not only are levels these massive mazes, but every room and hallway looks exactly like the last, giving you no familiarity with the level and just making you feel like you're trapped in limbo. As if this wasn't bad enough, the game also requires you to backtrack. And I don't mean like backtrack to a different part of the level you're currently in. Like, oh, you found the key you needed to open that door in the other room. Yeah, go walk back to it. Yeah, no, that would have been okay. I'm talking backtracking to levels you thought you were done with and had forgotten about. You'll travel to a different floor of this Cyberdyne facility that has a new aesthetic, with different colors and overall just a different theme. Thinking, well, at least I'm making progress, I'll just make my way through this next maze. Yeah, when I thought that, I went through a door that brought me back to the last level, and I had this feeling of impending doom as I realized, oh no. This game wants me to go back to older levels to access previously inaccessible areas? This is a nightmare. Take a look at the levels list, man. There are over 30 friggin' levels in this game. How did anyone ever play this game without a walkthrough, not knowing where all the key items are in these hellish mazes? Here's another thing, as if you didn't have enough to deal with already. I came across this gun part for a phase plasma cannon, and when I picked it up, it brought me to this screen showing how many I had left to collect to finish putting the gun together. I thought this was like a bonus challenge. Collect all the hidden gun parts and you get this extra powerful weapon to make things a little easier, to reward the player that really goes hard with exploring. No, it's required to beat the game. If you make it to the last level where you'll face off against the metanode without the phase plasma cannon, don't expect to be humanity's savior. At the very least, I expected combat to be decent, but even that was frustrating and wonky. Early on, you get a pretty good selection of weapons like a Beretta, Uzi 9mm, an M16, and Spaz 12 shotgun, but the hit detection on them is so weird. You'll very clearly have an enemy in your sights point blank, but the shots don't register. The game has to give you the okay to shoot the enemy by changing the minimap to a profile of the target in your sights, letting you know that, okay, now it's okay to shoot them. I gotta give this game some credit for having the most effective Terminator in the entire franchise though. When I came across this infiltrator type unit, I legitimately thought it was a friendly NPC that I had to rescue. Talk about your unassuming 9-to-5 Steve the pencil pusher. Look at that, he even has a clip-on tie. Yeah, stay away from this game. It's not worth the headache. Maybe the next Bethesda game will be the one to blow me away?
So all we have to do is destroy some janky software at this Cyberdyne place and we avoid Judgment Day?
Affirmative.
No. You don't say affirmative or some shit like that. You say no cap.
No cap?
Yeah! And if some mid-woke NPC with no riz comes at you with some L-takes, you say, touch grass! And if you want to be really based, you ratio them with your gat.
My gat?
For real.
Humanity is cooked.
See? Now you're getting it!
Wow, now this feels like the first significant leap in Terminator games. I'm not super familiar with PC games from this time, so I don't know if there were other first-person games of this level that came out in '95, but I was blown away with how well Terminator Future Shock holds up. I know Wolfenstein and Doom laid the groundwork for first-person shooters, but Terminator Future Shock is the oldest game I've played that feels like something your average FPS enjoyer would play today. You play as yet another nameless soldier that you can assign your own name to, and even give them a call sign. Would. The year is 2015 and you've just barely escaped an execution camp with the help of the Resistance soldier, Sergeant Roberts. Unfortunately, he's on his last breaths, but he lets you know of a car he has stowed away and how to get to John Connor and his HQ of Resistance soldiers, which you are now a part of. Immediately, I was blown away by the scale of these levels and how detailed they are for the time this game was released. They feel like they can go on forever, which had me thinking this was going to be a pseudo open world game, but the levels are actually self-contained. They're not linear, for there are plenty of areas to explore, and sometimes you can get lost and feel like you're straying into an endless wasteland, but the level's boundaries are cleverly defined by spiking levels of radiation, so you'll know when you're heading in the wrong direction. There are also a ton of interior environments to explore for ammo, armor, and medpacks, and not just interior environments that are mandatory to access for the sake of carrying out your main objective. Pretty much any building or storefront that has a door is accessible, giving you a sometimes overwhelming amount of places to scour through. I really like how these dilapidated indoor settings are a stark contrast to the rest of the game. They are so claustrophobic with narrow corridors, tightly packed with destroyed furniture, rubble, and collapsed ceilings. You'll often come across these seeker robots that hone in on you and explode on impact. They're really effective in these tight spaces and never fail to make me scramble away from them in a panic. There are a bunch of different enemies to frag here, some recognizable from the movies like the infiltrator units and the hunter-killer drones, but most I don't think I've seen before, like the bipedal raptor unit and the lanky spider robot. I just love their super low poly look. When Xavier and I listed all the Terminator video games we'd be covering in this retrospective, I was disappointed to see that there weren't any PlayStation 1 games. I love discovering old, forgotten, janky PS1 gems. And while Future Shock is a little more impressive in scale than anything you'd find on the PS1 during this time, it does still fill that void with these low poly models. Even though environments are made up of basic shapes, textures aren't the most detailed, and a lot of the set dressing like fire, barrels, and general junk are 2D sprites, the atmosphere is still palpable. The draw distance doesn't reach very far, having the star-filled night sky envelop the background, but that only adds to the ambiance as your hunters step out of the void with the determined mechanical whirring of their footsteps. Graphics truly peaked here. Combat here feels great and is a significant step up from Terminator 2029. After some simple remapping of the keys, it again feels very much like something you'd play today. Much like Doom, you can see enemies' incoming plasma fire, giving you a chance to dodge them and fire back. There is a substantial amount of weapons to pick up to demolish HKs above you with. Seeing the scrap metal rain down makes you feel like an absolute badass. So the Uzi, M16, and machine gun all use the ammo type clip, and energy-based weapons like the Phase Plasma Pistol, Phase Plasma Rifle, and Phase Plasma Cannon all use energy packs. They all use up different amounts of ammo per fire. Like a single shot from a plasma cannon will use up 10 energy, while a single shot from the plasma pistol will only use 1. I thought that was an interesting aspect to strategize with. It's tempting to blast away Terminators with your most powerful weapon, but it's best to switch accordingly if you're facing an enemy that doesn't require much firepower to take out. Otherwise, you'll end up putting multiple guns out of commission. Once we reach the scars stowed away by Roberts, we radio Connor and he gives us directions to their HQ. I was dreading the possibility of dedicated vehicle levels in this game, especially since it's played from a first-person perspective. But I was pleasantly surprised with how well vehicles control. Making sharp turns and careening through disabled vehicles on the road felt smooth, as well as simultaneously shooting any mounted weapons. Later on in the game, you get to repo an HK drone that you can fly around, and that too feels really good to control. Once we reach John Connor's hidden HQ inside this police station, we get to meet the legend himself and the rest of the crew. The rest of the team consists of Bishop, a pessimistic and cowardly member that I personally wouldn't want to have in my team. There's Brinks, a telecommunications expert, Hanover, the brains of the crew, second in command, Catherine Parker, and a young and eager Kyle Reese, to name the most significant players of the team. The story, mission briefing, and any details you need to carry out your objective, like directions, landmarks, and specific tasks, are given to you on this screen, and I absolutely love the art here. The game doesn't have any voice acting, save for one significant instance, but I say this is far more effective in immersing you in the experience than some hokey voice acting. Let's be real, voice acting in video games was nowhere near the quality you would eventually have by the time something like Metal Gear Solid was out. Plus, it's really cool to have John Connor address you by name in these dialogue boxes. From here on out, you'll be carrying out missions for John Connor to push back against Skynet's forces, like rescuing prisoners, retrieving intel from databases, and destroying convoys, to name a few. Like I said before, this is where your mission objectives will be detailed, and you're going to want to pay attention and perhaps take some notes, because once you start the mission, there's no mission log or briefing screen you can bring up on command. I always appreciate this because using context clues provided by NPCs and taking in the environment is more immersive than just following a mission marker or a bullet point on the top left corner of your screen. Occasionally, you'll get some pointers radioed in from your team, but it was never overbearing. However, an issue that was far too common in this game was how often I would end up soft-locking myself from progression. If you jump down from a catwalk to a lower level, you may end up putting yourself in a room whose door you can open from that side. Soft lock. There are a few missions that require you to use satchel charges to destroy structures, and you're always given the exact amount required. But the game allows you to use them anywhere with no way of replenishing. So if you use them in the incorrect spot, soft lock. It's possible to destroy boxes you absolutely need to jump on to reach a platform. Soft lock. Eventually, I developed a sixth sense that made me save just before I suspected I might do something that would result in me getting soft lock. But still, I have no idea how all of these got past QA testing because they're so easy to come across. While I do appreciate the game not spoon-feeding me directions, when it comes to hitting buttons and flipping switches, it's not always clear what they do or what door they open. Most times I was able to figure it out by hitting the button and quickly whipping my head around looking for any signs of movement from any doors or bridges, but sometimes there'll be switches that open doors in entirely different rooms with no indication. This was a huge issue in the last level that takes place in a Skynet facility where rooms and hallways blend together. There are a few sections that require you to do some platforming, and this is definitely not the game's strength. The physics when you jump never felt right, and collision was super janky. I would often get stuck in some geometry, or my character would just jitter in place. Alright, back to the story. While on one of your routine missions, the team's headquarters is ambushed by Terminators, one of which happens to look like Bishop. A couple members of the team are taken out and were forced to relocate to a safer location. At this point, Terminators appear to be spawning out of flashes of light at random. Eventually, Hanover discovers that Skynet has the capability to time travel and has been strategically sending units back in time using their knowledge of the future to directly obstruct our path and hit us when we least expect it. This is genius because what would otherwise feel like unfair enemy spawning and bullshit on the game's part is contextualized within the game's plot. Skynet knows when you're gonna hack that terminal or walk into that pile of ammo, so of course they time displace a Terminator there. We also find out that the reason there was a Terminator that looked exactly like Bishop is because he sold his bitch ass to Skynet to save his own skin. Well, more accurately, he sold his skin to Skynet so that they can use his DNA to clone him and graft his skin over the T-800 units. So now we're gonna kill his ass. And in one of, if not the only instance where the game has voice acting, we find Bishop strapped into a hellish contraption, mutilated and begging for a mercy kill. This to me is the heaviest part of the game, and I love that it's delivered through gameplay, allowing us to pull the trigger against this traitor to humanity. Before we make the final push, Hanover figures out that Skynet has been transmitting information back to its original computer back in the Cyberdyne facility in 1995 to fast track its progress toward achieving sentience. I don't know why the writers here chose 1995, which contradicts the year Terminator 2 establishes, 1997, but whatever. Anyway, Hanover develops a virus and stores it into 5 disks that we must insert into Skynet's systems to block it from transmitting information to 1995 and stop Judgment Day from ever happening. Like I said before, this Skynet facility is massive and it is such a convoluted maze that splits out into a bunch of different sections, and it is really easy to get lost. It has enemies around every corner, and honestly the game took a significant dip in the fun factor because I spent so much time running around in circles. But eventually we insert all 5 disks into the 5 separate terminals, and in a very strange turn of events, not only does destroying the Skynet facility stop Judgment Day from ever happening in 95, but the current timeline in 2015 also changes to a pristine utopia that looks like that one meme. So I guess Kyle Reese never has to get sent back in time or any of that? I thought for sure the game was setting us up to eventually get there. Bethesda blew me away with this entry in their series of Terminator games. Despite the issues I had with soft locking and some areas being a little too maze-like to enjoy, most levels are super fun to get through. The atmosphere is mesmerizing, and even though the story took a strange turn in the ending, I really like the characters and dialogue in between missions. I'm looking forward to the next game from Bethesda to see how they can improve on an already fantastic foundation.
I feel like we don't talk enough about how Skynet and Cyberdyne are like perfect fake names for a software and the company that developed it. Especially since they came up with that in the early 80s. Like, I could absolutely see people signing up for a Skynet Online email address in 2001. Genesis is shit though. It's just like, it just looks yucky when you see it spelled out that way. So I guess it makes sense for modern software services because the competition is just the letter X.
Skynet, or as it's more specifically called in Europe, the Terminator Skynet, is Bethesda's follow-up to Terminator Future Shock. I feel like it's kind of ballsy to simply call it Skynet in the US. Yeah, Skynet is a huge name in Terminator lore, and anyone even remotely in tune with pop culture would recognize it, but still, I respect them for not attaching the big franchise name to this game's title. Skynet released just a year after Future Shock, and it was originally meant to be an expansion for that game, and boy can you tell. Enemies, level assets, and weapons are reused, and the game pretty much plays exactly the same. I wonder if this was sold at a lower price than normal, because the game is significantly shorter and doesn't offer anything innovative in the gameplay department. Not to say that this is a bad game, it's not, and there have been some improvements. Levels feel a bit more intricate by offering some verticality, underwater sections, and some set pieces that give them a more cinematic and actiony feel. Like this level where you have to escape a submarine that's falling apart. I also feel like they contain way more enemies than Future Shock. Loading into indoor sections is also much faster, and the game allows you to enable high resolution graphics, which you won't be able to see here because running this game with high-res graphics enabled on a modern rig causes it to run into some frame rate issues. So I had to knock it down to a lower resolution. There is a patch out there that fixes this issue, but I was kinda running out of time to cover all these Terminator games by this point, and it takes me a while to fiddle with game files before I get things working properly. But I see this as a win. These crunchy pixels are a delight. The biggest change Skynet brings is the introduction of FMV cutscenes. That's right, we no longer have to settle for crudely animated images with text boxes. We have an entire cast of actors here bringing returning characters to life. I think this is the first video game I've played with FMV cutscenes of this era, and upgrade, I guess? Alright, while I do prefer the simpler form Future Shock delivers its story in, these FMV cutscenes are pretty charming. Plus, who am I to criticize someone's subpar acting in front of a blue screen? And if I'm being honest, the acting here is not really laughable. I thought everyone did a decent job of capturing their respective characters' attitude. It is a little distracting that everyone's military fatigues are so clean and crisp though. Some weathering would have gone a long way, guys. Our protagonist has a voice as well this time around, taking away from the self-insert aspect the original game had. He doesn't only speak in cutscenes, but also during gameplay, as a way to clue the player to their next objective, and as we hit story beats.
It heads west through the hills and then cuts south. Recon indicates the road is pretty well defended, but it will definitely bring you back.
All right then, I'd better get going. See you at base.
Like I said, we have returning characters like our fearless leader John Connor, young Kyle Reese, Bill Hanover, and Major Parker. You might be asking, how could this be possible? Because in the last game, the past and present was rewritten so that Judgment Day never happened. Well, further supporting the fact that this was originally meant to be an expansion, the game takes place somewhere in the middle of Future Shock's story. And yeah, this game's story premise is a glorified run-of-the-mill mission that could have been condensed to 3 or so levels. During one of our scouting missions, we find out that the bots have access to a nuke and are planning to give our once pretty blue planet the old double tap. From there on, it's a wild goose chase to find out where the Terminators got the nuke from, track down data of the nuke, intervene the nuke, and finally overwrite the nuke's intended coordinates to survive another day. The ending is very anticlimactic. Once you stop the nuke from wiping out what's left of humanity, you literally ride off into the sunset, and that's it, the end. If I knew this ahead of time, I probably would have booted up Skynet in the middle of my Future Shock playthrough. Yeah, it would have been weird to suddenly have FMV cutscenes, then go back to the minimally animated character profiles of Future Shock, but at least I'd have a complete and concise story. Of all the Bethesda Terminator games, Future Shock and Skynet are easy recommendations. The first one is ambitious but far too obtuse and frustrating to play by today's standards. 2029 has a cool aesthetic and surprisingly deep customization options, but the grid-based movement system and shooting mechanics might be too big of a hurdle for some people. Future Shock and Skynet feel a lot like an indie game you'd play today, if a bit slower and some frustrating level-breaking design.
Oh, I get it. It's the third act of T2 because everyone just recreates that one instead of doing anything new with the franchise.
Terminator Salvation was dabbed on too hard, my guy.
Yeah, goated for real.
That shit was bussin'. Here's one of those sussy Skynet terminals. Housed within each of them is a component of Skynet's future programming, each one more mid than the last. We have to mog them to ensure a skibbity quirked up Sigma future comes to pass ussy.
Okay, dial it back. Aw, hell yeah! Now this is the kind of game I've been wanting from this retrospective. An old school PS2 game with low poly models, dark and dingy graphics, and for some reason gameplay like Devil May Cry. You got dual wielding pistols, doing sick ass melee attacks against Terminators with fixed camera angles on a thrash metal soundtrack. This is insane! Dawn of Fate is a prequel to the original Terminator and chronicles the final days of Kyle Reese's life in the Future War before being sent back in time.
Fuck you, asshole.
The story is narrated by General John Connor as he explains that he knows what the future holds, and he's really just guiding all the pieces in place. Yeah, it's my buddy John. He's 20 years older than me, but he keeps calling me things like Dad, and Pops, and my biological father. It's just some cute nickname he has for me. He's a quirky guy, you know? You can play as TechCom Rebel soldiers Kyle Reese, Catherine Luna, and Justin Perry, who all play basically the same, but they have different weapons. Perry's rocket launcher pistol thing is by far the best gun in the game. While this does have fixed camera angles, many of you whippersnappers will be elated to hear that it doesn't have tank controls. So while that does make you a lot more nimble compared to the enemies, it does have that problem of your controls changing directions based on the placement of the camera. So when it switches to another angle, you have that brief moment where you have to stop walking and then start again based on the new way it's oriented. Tank controls were kind of brilliant in that you never had that problem at all, but too many people thought it was stiff and clunky, so this goofy-ass maneuver happening every time the perspective shifts is the compromise. We pay a high price for no tank controls. There is a first-person aiming mode option, but I never really felt like I needed to use it because the lock-on is good enough that I was able to move around and shoot pretty well in third-person mode. I did find a funny exploit that if you lock on and then quickly switch to first-person, the reticule is always accidentally locked onto the enemy's neck and insta-kills them because it registers that as a headshot. They went for a really cinematic approach with this one because the cutscenes are surprisingly long when you get to them, and there's a lot of dialogue and character interactions with the other rebels. There are 10 levels in this game, taking you closer and closer to the Time Machine facility on a trek from LA to NORAD, Colorado. To the game's credit, they did seem to put some effort into recreating all that stuff that Kyle Reese mentioned had happened on his way to the past.
Their defense grid was smashed. We'd won.
Is that when you captured the lab complex and found that, the time displacement equipment?
The Terminator had already gone through. Connor sent me to intercept, and they blew the whole place.
They even showed a recreation of the picture, without spending money on Linda Hamilton's likeness. The Terminator they showed also looks nothing like Arnold. Like, it's pretty obvious this is meant to be the phone book killer from the first movie, but he's got black hair and a goatee. He looks like a buff Tony Stark. The music in this is so un-Terminator-like, but I fucking love it. They got Fear Factory on this game's soundtrack. All this does is make you feel more powerful. Like, I'm not afraid of the machines. I feel invincible with this playing. They're afraid of me! The biggest snag preventing this game from being awesome is that the combat can be frustrating and repetitive. Infinitely respawning Terminators just keep teleporting in or walking in through designated doors, and most, if not all, mission objectives require you to kill all of them before you can pass. But they just keep showing up. At some points, I was just in the same room for like 10 minutes, killing the same 3 enemies over and over, wondering if the game was bugged or if I was doing something I shouldn't be doing to progress. And there's also times where they take a second to appear, so you get this awkward moment of pacing around, waiting for them to finally spawn in so you can mop the floor with them again. But sure enough, eventually the game decides after 30-odd enemies that you've killed enough and tells you to leave. That tedium kills a lot of momentum this game has and makes you just want to get it over with faster instead of enjoying it. It's not difficult by any means, just pretty slow and awkward at times. I encountered a weird bug where the brightness and game audio all randomly were set to 0 for no reason. The turret sections are a little clumsy because your aiming is so imprecise and it just sort of snaps to certain placements like it's on a grid that you can't see. And you can't line up shots on Terminators if they're not exactly aligned with your reticle. Like, there's no splash damage on these rockets, you have to hit them dead on. I don't hate this gameplay, I can make it work, but it needed some polish before I'd say it's up to par, especially in 2001 when other games were getting so much smoother and easier to play. The bosses tend to just be large machines that soak up a lot of damage, like the hunter-killer tanks and planes, or these spider-loader robots that carry things. The solution to most major problems is sticking a brick of C4 to the side of whatever your guns can't kill and then just running for cover. Are you kidding me? You can't just time travel in another one on top of the one I just killed. The real highlight is when you finally meet the first proper T-800 of the game, and it's treated like an event.
Now this is the amazing machine to kill you both. Finally.
The boss fight has multiple phases where you blast away his disguise piece by piece, and he changes his moveset as you pick him apart. It's a really solid moment for the game and made me appreciate the rest of it a lot more. There's this odd subplot with no payoff about these two brothers who felt like John Connor betrayed them, so they joined Skynet and became cyborgs to sell out humanity.
Kyle Reese.
Stone. You traitor.
When a traitor betrays a traitor, is he still a traitor? I think not.
I don't know how you go up to Skynet and say you want to betray humanity. I feel like they just shoot you on sight. They're robots. Like, they don't negotiate. But then there's a line at the end like they were playing both sides and didn't want Skynet to win after the humans destroy it.
It worked perfectly. Our enemies have crippled each other.
They show up periodically throughout the game, but never actually affect the plot in a substantial way. They're just kind of there. I feel like this was intended to prop up a sequel's plot. I guess the last two missions are technically the opening couple of minutes from Terminator Genisys, since they're both depicting what is essentially the same event in the timeline. It's interesting that the time machine looks really similar in both. I wonder if there was some connection behind that. Because this is a video game, and a malicious piece of software that wants to kill all humans is maybe a bit too abstract, Skynet's main processor is actually a giant metal brain with an eyeball and rocket launchers in it that you can just blow up. It's ironic that this game suggested that there was a central core in NORAD when the movie that came out the following year was just like, you can't blow up Skynet, it's the internet basically, it's not housed anywhere, that bitch is in the cloud, you can't shoot the cloud! Regardless, Kyle Reese manages to successfully kill Skynet with a gun and then travels back in time to get laid. Weird how he never mentioned any of this to Sarah. Maybe he could have just told her where the big robot eye would be so she could blow it up 30 years earlier. But much like Ultron, Brainiac, or any other self-respecting evil AI, Skynet's got a working backup ready to launch and restore its files. I wish I was that smart because I accidentally lost all of my gameplay footage for this game and had to spend 3 days replaying it. Ugh.
So many corners and recesses of the Terminator mythology that you can explore, and a movie lets you explore a certain number of them, but you only have 2 hours in a movie. In a video game, you have as much time as you want to spend. It allows...
His film is notable as the only one in the series where John Connor is dressed like Charlie Kelly. Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines, developed by Black Ops Entertainment. There was a time when I think it became a clause in actors' contracts that they had to provide their voice and likeness to video game tie-ins to major franchises. This was back when video games were a bit simpler and much faster to produce, and were probably seen more as an extension of merchandising, like action figures, clothes and posters, McDonald's toys, and cereal boxes, rather than how we see games now, which are on par with massive tentpole movie productions involving hundreds, if not thousands, of artists and technical staff. Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines is a product of that transitional period.
I've been asked many times to do video games. I always felt like this doesn't look like me. I mean, this is not my face. So I always stayed away from that if it is not my likeness or if it doesn't do the movie justice.
It's proud to be the first game in the franchise to have Arnold involved as well as the other two leads. This is the first one he signed on for because it was probably the first that had the technology to accurately capture his likeness. Maybe that comes across as a bit of an expensive waste for a first-person shooter game, but he's displayed in all his chiseled glory in cutscenes and 3D fighting sequences designed to capture the savage hand-to-hand Terminator-on-Terminator violence of the movie. He also loves to talk and give himself words of encouragement.
Lock and load. Excellent. Rock and roll.
Even before being reprogrammed by the Resistance.
Excellent.
Maybe this T-850 is glitchy. Terminator 3 is probably the lightest on story in the entire franchise, and is mostly just a single breathless chase sequence that lacks the philosophical gravitas of T2, or the love story amid a grisly horror movie of T1. Its dialogue is simple and utilitarian, but also mostly undercut with deadpan humor.
Drop dead, you asshole!
I'm unable to comply.
T3 is the one that's trying hard to be the funniest in the franchise.
talk to the hand.
Which I guess helps make the subject matter of the end of the world, mass casualties, and inescapable destiny go down a little easier. You play as the dry-witted, comical chucklefuck T-850 named... Oh, you know what? This is the only one I don't have a name for. Someone always calls them something in the movies.
I can hear it now. He's gonna be called a goddamn phone book killer.
Uncle Bob. Uncle Bob, this is Enrique.
Uncle Bob, huh?
But not this guy. Well, unless you count...
Patience, honey.
And...
Whoa, bitch! Wait your turn, honey, bitch.
Alright, his name is Honey Bitch. Moving on. The team behind this one seemed really excited to recreate moments of the movie, but also to show the scenes between the scenes.
The game's basic premise in general is we're actually mirroring the movie, in addition to adding some sequences that are normally off-screen or away from the movie.
I guess for them that meant having 60% of the game be a prologue before he even time travels. So this starts earlier than the film with a grizzled Catherine Brewster / Connor capturing and reprogramming Honey Bitch to aid the resistance. That's neat, we don't see that often. Arnold gets a pass because he's playing an emotionless robot.
Does Skynet know that you've been reprogrammed?
Affirmative. Come with me if you want to live.
Stop the car! The police are chasing
Sorry, I
us.
can't.
You're gonna tick off those cops, huh? Talk to me!
But boy, are these other two not voice actors. Oh, complaining about the turrets in Dawn of Fate was foreshadowing. Like, a simple first-person shooter shouldn't be too difficult, but the sensitivity on the joystick aiming is absurdly high. I barely flick the stick and look straight up at the ceiling or straight down at the ground. Then I turn it down one notch lower and suddenly he's turning so slowly that I won't be able to legitimately line up a shot on anything. I was going to chalk this up to age, but then I remembered this came out 2 years after Halo Combat Evolved. And even on the original Xbox version, that game is still buttery smooth. There's just not really an excuse for the precision to be this scuffed. And I'm not emulating this, I'm literally playing this off the PS2 disc. I think they added this auto-target mode like GTA San Andreas to compensate though. And with the Terminator's scanning abilities, it seems reasonable that they'd be able to aim like that, but it doesn't seem to target the enemy closest to you and often feels like it's picking them at random. The hit detection is finicky, so sometimes your shots pass directly through enemies without damaging them. Switching weapons is a pain in the ass because it has to cycle through all of them and there's no dedicated button for each weapon. Maybe this is one of those things that would work smoother on a PC, like the number buttons for switching weapons in Half-Life. But if I want to switch from my rifle to my laser gun, I have to cycle through the pistol and the melee first, and it's slow enough that it causes me problems in combat when I can't get to the right gun fast enough, and I'm taking damage. He's so leisurely about getting out his weapons and so slow to reload. These animations are ridiculous. Hurry up, honey bitch! Here's a sort of cool thing where as you take damage, more of your endoskeleton is exposed and you can see the skin chipping away from his hands in combat, and the rest of him when it turns to the third-person perspective now and then. Health items that restore your synthetic Austrian hide are infrequent enough that it's annoying, and there's no inventory system, so you just have to find them laying around. They're styled like the power cell batteries he has in the movie, which is cool. You have a Terminator detective mode vision that scans stuff and highlights weak points you can destroy to progress, but sometimes I'll turn it on just because the bright red filter makes the environment easier to navigate, because this game's dark as shit and there's no brightness setting in the options menu. That's a party foul! You have to have a brightness slider in a 3D game. Dawn of Fate had one, come on! Other times the scan mode just takes a drab dark gray environment and makes it look like a Virtual Boy that's equally difficult to navigate. And these distracting text overlays, while technically movie accurate, really clutter the frame with useless information that I can't even focus on. The game is really bad about making destructible objects in the environment stand out. It always looks exactly like any other post-apocalyptic scenery and rubble. These graphics are too dark and dingy. I can't see shit half the time I'm playing this on my TV. Is this that Black Mirror everyone told me about? This game is bland to look at in all the future war segments. The Skynet facility level was such a breath of fresh air. My god, levels I can see. What a concept! Better get used to going to the map screen though, because doors are sometimes hard to make out in the ugliness of the environment,
so you're liable to walk past them a dozen times before noticing them. The fighting game sequences are a half-baked addition. The tutorial has you fight another Model 101, which is cool. I think this is the first example of this mirror match in the franchise, well over a decade before Pops vs. the Phone Book Killer happened. These segments are a novelty, but they lack the same sophistication of a proper fighting game. The movesets are very limited, and you're going to be seeing the same handful of grab animations repeated constantly. The game's difficulty and pacing are a mess. The first half is annoyingly hard because of the game's janky mechanics, but once you get back to the past, it becomes dirt easy. There's also just not that much material from the movie that they could adapt into gameplay. An action FPS doesn't work unless you have dozens of enemies to kill, and for long stretches in the movie, he just doesn't, which results in them using 2 back-to-back fighting game sequences with the TX. Also, at like the 75% mark of the game, they start using footage from the movie instead of pre-rendered cutscenes, and it's really jarring. I don't think you can monetize an unedited long play of this game because there's like massive segments where it's just playing scenes from the movie. Then, just for something else to be a full level, they show you an even earlier scene where Honey Bitch kills John Connor in the future. There's a rule in screenwriting called come in late, leave early. You don't need to show the character find his keys, get in the car, drive for 20 minutes, or park his car, walk into the diner, then wait for their friend to show up so they can have an important conversation. You just fucking cut to them talking in the diner, because the rest of that isn't important. A movie would have shown this flashback like this.
What? What are you saying?
I killed you. John Connor, it is time.
But this is a game, so we have to show you the entire lead up attacking the Resistance to get to John, and you can tell they were scraping for anything to be converted into gameplay because the movie didn't provide enough.
Lock.
The rest of the game is the most irritating sound in the world. Oh, God, stop! Enemies that can barely damage you at all. And a level to show you how Honey Bitch got the helicopter working so he could immediately crash it, which was such crucial information. The mechanics are unpolished, the levels are confusing, the graphics need some work, and it's just struggling to find usable material to adapt because the movie doesn't give them much to work with. This is unfortunately one of the clunkiest first-person shooters I've ever played, and I suspect it's another case of being rushed to meet a deadline in time for the movie release date. Can't recommend it. Take your 2003 money that's worth a lot more elsewhere. Go buy Simpsons Hit and Run instead. All I can say is that Terminator 3 is a sloppy movie, but it has one of the best endings to a Hollywood blockbuster ever. It's so gut-wrenching to find out that Judgment Day was unavoidable, even if they did postpone it.
John, we could just let it go.
Catherine suggests that maybe John lets it all go, either living as a regular survivor and never leaving the safety of their bomb shelter, or even using the explosives in his hand to take the messy way out. But instead, he chooses to answer humanity's call and finally become the person he always knew he was meant to be. So in a sense, he did have a say in his future after all. He consciously chose his destiny instead of denying it. And this movie also has inflatable boobs.
Rise of the Machines also got a GBA port, and man, I get so excited for these, because you can't get nearly as ambitious on a handheld as you can on a home console. I'm always interested to see what genre they go for to make these titles appropriate for the portable system. Are they gonna make it a 2D shooter a la Contra? A turn-based RPG like Pokemon? Shit, sometimes developers swing for the fences and develop a whole-ass first-person shooter on the GBA. Commendable, but god, these turn out ugly. Thankfully, developers Tanico went for something I can wrap my head around, and made Terminator 3 on GBA a top-down isometric shooter with some interesting controls that do their best to give you some flexibility when it comes to movement. The D-pad controls Honey Bitch and has him walk in the direction of your choosing. Duh, right? But pressing the L button allows you to cycle through different movement modes. You have walk, run, and strafe. Cycling through these movement modes comes in handy in different situations. Running is useful for making quick getaways, as well as when you have to make your way through environmental hazards like these stomping mechanisms on a conveyor belt. And strafing is useful for dodging incoming attacks and protecting NPCs from incoming enemies. It helps that switching through these movement modes is easily done by just tapping the L button. Shooting can sometimes feel not as intuitive though. Holding down the A button will plant you in place as you shoot, and you can switch your target with the D-pad. This feels great, but for some reason this doesn't work for every weapon. Some weapons force you to walk as you shoot, and it feels clunky when you try to line up your shots against multiple targets. Shooting from an isometric camera perspective without some sort of lock-on system or laser reticle is already tricky, and zooming past your enemies as you try to shoot them just adds more frustration. I gotta say, this game is not much of a looker. It goes for that pseudo 3D art style for their character sprites, and I don't think I've ever seen a GBA game where this looks great. It gives their character a messy and crunchy look, and it certainly doesn't help that this game has a muddy and bleak color palette, which some might say is fitting for a game set during a robot apocalypse. But when I think about the scorched LA landscape during the Future War, I don't think brown, gray, and desaturated. I think blue and contrasting neon red laser fire. The 90s games took that color scheme and made it work really well with their 16-bit graphics. I wish this game would have done something similar. We begin our adventure as Honey Bitch alongside resistance fighters during the Future War as we set up the time displacement machine to send ourselves back to the past. Along the way, you'll have different tasks like tracking down key cards, protecting NPCs as they hack terminals, and even some vehicle sections that surprisingly controlled pretty well. There's a good variety of weapons ranging from your standard pistol, shotgun, SMG, all the way to more powerful stuff like plasma rifles and rocket launchers. But honestly, the most powerful weapon at your disposal is your own 5-fingered Mary. This one thing one-shots just about everything standing in your way. I mean, makes sense, we're playing as Arnie after all. Halfway through the list of levels, we make our way back to present day, and the game feels like it's in a rush to wrap up at this point. Even though there are an equal amounts of levels set during the future and in the past, the levels in the past are half as long as the ones in the future, which makes this game's story feel weirdly paced and lopsided. I was actually expecting the portion set in the Future War to be no longer than an intro level. Instead, it's the majority of the game. It's pretty funny seeing the grave scene from the movie be adapted with more kid-friendly dialogue. In the movie, it's this intensely emotional moment for John Connor when Honey Bitch pulls out what John believes to be his mother's resting place. But in this game, when you open Sarah Connor's coffin to reveal the weapons she left behind, John Connor is like, "Oh, awesome! Jackpot, dude!" The boss fight against the TX has a massive difficulty spike. Everything that came before was pretty much smooth sailing, but the TX has 3 different phases that require you to use specific weapons, otherwise she's completely impervious to your attempts. What makes this difficult is that this game gives you a slow drip of ammo for the weapons needed to attack her. You get like 2 rockets at a steady pace, and it makes it super frustrating when you miss your shots. Which happen to me often because periodically 2 T-800s will spawn in, and you might accidentally waste ammo on them rather than the TX. In the final phase of the boss, you heroically sacrifice yourself by chucking your fusion core at the TX and blowing the whole place up. I had low expectations for this game, but I think it consistently offers an entertaining experience by keeping levels well paced with different objectives and giving the player a vast array of weapons to blow enemies away with. I wish it offered more in terms of aesthetics. Like I said before, all levels have this ugly, muddy look that makes them all feel samey and, well, they make me feel like Honey Bitch looks in the game over screen. Terminator 3 War of the Machines for the PC is a multiplayer-focused first-person shooter that, well, must have not been that much of a hit because I didn't even know it existed before we decided to do this retrospective. Granted, I was only 10 years old when this came out and had no idea what was going on in the world of PC gaming, but even then, multiplayer-only games tend to get cult followings and you'll hear about them through word of mouth years later. But no, not a single peep about War of the Machines in my experience. Obviously, there's probably no one on Earth playing this today except myself, so I had to set up private matches against bots, which is fitting for a game about artificial intelligence eradicating humanity. Honestly, I didn't hate my time with this game. It's got sort of a Star Wars Battlefront thing going on with large-scale battles in all sorts of different maps. You can choose between fighting on Skynet's side or Tech Comms, and each faction has different soldier classes you can play as, like a scout, support, or heavy gunner. You also get access to special characters as the battle progresses, like Honey Bitch. Your goal is to capture bases spread throughout the map for your forces to spawn in, and the more you capture, the faster you gather points toward victory. So yeah, this is very much like Star Wars Battlefront. It just never reached that grand scale epicness from those games. Even though you have some maps here that are pretty large and offer vehicles for you to traverse them, they don't quite reach the size the ones in Battlefront do, and it never felt like I was taking on an opposing army. Just a slightly larger team than you would face in a standard team deathmatch. Judging from the offline version of the game I played, there doesn't seem to be any type of campaign or story mode. Yeah, this says single player here, but really it's just where you go to play matches against bots. I think this is a missed opportunity because they could have easily implemented a story mode, much like the one in Battlefront, that tells the story of the rise of the Empire from the perspective of a 501st Legion veteran. I think it would have been really cool for this game to pick up some odd months after the movie ended, and we'd get to see John Connor become the legendary leader he does, from the perspective of a grunt as we take on battles spanning across multiple years. But all you can do here is customize the player session by changing your opponent's difficulty, the score to win, time limit, and the ratio of Skynet forces to TechCom soldiers. This is a fine idea for a game, but it never stood a chance against Star Wars Battlefront. The skirmishes in the Future War we briefly see and hear about from Kyle Reese never reached the level of popularity of battles like the one in Hoth, Endor, or even any of the ones from the prequel movies, which made getting to experience them firsthand in those video games that much more exciting. Like any video game, maybe this one would have been worthwhile if you played with other people, but there's really no reason to jump into it today.
Terminator 3 Redemption by Paradigm Entertainment, the same devs as Dawn of Fate. I don't think I've ever seen this before, but there are two separate games made by different developers based on the same movie on the same console. I've seen a generational gap with games like the PS2 and PS3 ports of Spider-Man 3 being different because of the limitations of the older gen console. I've seen unique games on different consoles made based on the same movie, like all those damn Terminator 2 games Diego covered. But two different PS2 titles released only a year apart adapting Terminator 3 is weird. And apparently they were supposed to come out the same year, but this one was delayed a few months. The only example I could think of is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade on NES. This is such a rarity, like 2 yolks and 1 egg. So while the other was a great value Medal of Honor, this is like a racing game and a rail shooter and a third-person shooter? This one's so weird and hard to define because it's a bunch of things all at once, which I guess makes it pretty unique compared to most games I've come across. These games must have been built side by side with one another because there's even a demo for Redemption on the disc of Rise of the Machines. Nice to see there's no bad blood, even though they're creating essentially two competing versions of the exact same product. This one's got almost the same plot and structure, but different. It opens with a cutscene of the TX nakedly killing some resistance fighters before heading back in time. We've seen 3 different versions of this time machine in as many years now. It's kind of funny. Then we get different interpretations of the same off-screen story events. This one also has a scene with Honey Bitch being captured and reprogrammed, but this time Kate Brewster is kind of against it because she's still sore at him for killing John, and it's this other guy that convinces her it's a good plan. How did this happen? This never happens. This too has everyone's likeness rights and uses footage from the movie in place of certain cutscenes, but it doesn't have any of the movie cast's voices, though sometimes I think a handful of voice lines from the Terminator making wisecracks are reused recordings from whatever sessions he did for Rise of the Machines.
This is where you get off. Eat me. Download this. I don't think so. That is what I'm talking about. No problem. Talk to the hand. Terminated.
And the rest are a sound-alike actor that ranges from pretty decent to pretty bad depending on the line.
It is a Terminator, Model TX, designed for extreme combat.
Can't you find a way to destroy it?
Unlikely. And an obsolete design.
Yes, there's a dedicated one-liner button, like a pull string on the back of a Woody.
Exceptional. That is what I'm talking about. Piece of cake. No problem.
You press L2 and he says something dumb. That's all people ever talk about with this game. When I
I don't think it cracks even the top 5 most interesting things about this. First impressions? In terms of PS2 graphics, this looks great. Not just the pre-rendered cutscenes, but the actual in-game models are really detailed. And the lighting isn't so dim and dark. I can actually see what's going on the default brightness. Terminator battle damage looks better, and you can see mechanical stuff moving inside of his skin, and the enemy Terminator models are better. The actors' likenesses are captured much better. This one's so much easier on the eyes than its sister game. This is one of those games where you play it just a few years after the PS1 and think, holy shit, what an improvement. Leaps like this will never happen again in gaming. We've hit the graphics wall. Aiming and shooting is so much better in this than either of the previous games. It's not that weird effect where it feels like it's snapping to preordained spaces on an invisible grid. The reticle is actually able to smoothly roll over any pixel on the screen, though it's not centered during the vehicle combat. It's got this kind of rail shooter / early Wii game thing going on. Combat is quite forgiving though, because you just have to aim inside the general area of these target circles and it'll count for damage. So even though you can be precise with it, the game doesn't force you to be. There's just so little of this though. You walk through 2 or 3 rooms maximum and shoot at only one enemy type, and then the level switches to vehicle stuff for the vast majority of it. No exploration or level design at all. You just walk forward and kill a few metal shamblers on the way to your car. You only really get to walk around for the first 45 seconds of a 6-minute long level on average. Usually they'll put a turret section in just so you stay in one of those rooms a little longer, and you don't realize how short the third-person sequences are. Most often there's no on-foot combat at all, and you just start off in your car. It seems this game really wanted to emphasize the car chase elements of the Terminator, especially in light of that awesome crane chase in the movie. That one scene in the movie is split across 3 levels here, so you can ride along the back of vehicles while shooting, melee enemies that are trying to board your vehicles, and jump from one moving vehicle to the next. This is a lot of shit to keep track of at first, and it's a bit overwhelming having to shoot, drive, and fight all at once, but eventually you get the hang of it by compartmentalizing all 3 tasks. The aiming happens completely independent of how you're driving the car, which is hard to get used to. I'm so accustomed to the standardized driving mechanics that are in all video games, but this is a whole other thing. Oh hey, they reused one of the non-metal songs from Dawn of Fate. That's cool.
Luna reporting in. I'm through the subway and at the top of the stairs. Request further instructions.
These levels are also massive with no loading screens. They just keep going and going without looping you like a racetrack at all, and it's really impressive. There's a lot of variety to the mission objectives. Here's a pursuit mission where you have to use shortcuts to keep up with a much faster vehicle. Here's a mission where you're defensively keeping the TX off your car by using the environment. Here's one where you're pursuing and attacking a larger vehicle. Here's one where you have to ram a SWAT van to re-kidnap Kate Brewster. This game's so dead set on blasting through set pieces as quickly as possible. Logic be damned. In the movie, Kate convinces Honey Bitch to go save her father at Cyber Research Systems. Terrible name for a company, fuck you. And then her dad tells them to go to Crystal Peak while being vague about why. In the game, Honey Bitch is just like, we have to go here and then here.
I must take you to Crystal Peak. It is approximately 50 miles north, bearing 352.
How do we get there?
Cyber Research Systems is 2.49 miles from here. You can acquire aerial transportation there and fly to Crystal Peak.
It's like you read the script ahead of time. Levels are geographically huge, but they go by so quickly that you'll start to realize this game's also 90 minutes long. So to compensate, they made it ass-chappingly hard. The checkpoints are extremely unforgiving and always, without fail, send you to the start of the level, even if you failed right at the end. This game demands perfect runs, so you'll be doing a lot of trial and error to figure out what it wants you to do. I don't think it's possible to beat this whole game on the first try, no matter how good you are. You get way too many curveballs thrown at you. I'd go so far as to say this is one of the most unforgivingly difficult games I've ever played and beaten. Especially that third act where it sends you to the future again. I spent hours stuck on every individual level from this point forward, except for that hangar mission. That was like a nice breather before I spent 45 minutes to an hour on the final boss. But nothing compares to this obnoxious set of missions in here with infiltrating future Skynet. At one point, I contemplated pulling the disc out of my PS3 and snapping it in half like a psycho and just reviewing footage from someone else's long play from this point forward. I was so mad. But I didn't, and I suffered, and you better subscribe if you haven't already, or I'll snap you in half. This third-person section comes out of nowhere after having to do basically no sequences like this for the majority of the game, and then expects you to handle dozens of flying enemies with staggeringly more firepower than you, infinitely respawning T-900s, and these massive turrets that fire the only projectiles in the game that you can't shoot out of the air. Then they throw you onto the back of an aerial HK for this thread-the-needle flying level that has almost no margin for error to beat the stringent time trial. Pro tip, if you fly over this glowing button, go through the alternate path that opens up, and then catch up to this transport thing, you can do a big skip over a major portion of the level. I watched a lot of walkthroughs for this part, and I never saw anyone use this trick, so I'm glad I caught it on camera in the run where I finally made it. Then you get to the final and most painful vehicle mission of the game. Okay, first you have to shoot the locks off this hangar door while being bombarded with enemies, then you have to chase the carrier transport on these walkways and shoot out all of the engines under another strict time trial, dealing with all the sloppy driving controls, going over these ramps and bridges with no guardrails, and then this big rail shooter segment that's fine because I don't think you can actually die here, I never did, and then this obtuse objective of landing on a vehicle you've never used before, and then having the intuition from this moment in the cutscene to know that it wants you to drain the power from the other walkers and then nudge them into place on the graded floor pads to charge the time machine engines. God, this wouldn't be so daunting if there were checkpoints. Doing 4 different rooms with 4 different objectives in a row without dying in one perfect shot is asking so much. In fact, this game asks too much of the player. This is the kind of difficulty where it stops being a fun challenge and crosses over into just not being fun at all because it's unreasonable. I never want to play this game again after this video. But you know what? I still beat it, damn it. Legit, no cheats. All this for a reused cutscene? How did he get that exact outfit back? He must have robbed another stripper outside the hangar. The final boss has you covering John and Kate +8 while they fiddle with the door security codes, and the TX is commanding every vehicle in the room to drive into you or blast you to pieces. The key is to just be proactive and blow up all of the vehicles before she can activate them. At last, in one final moment of the game asking for perfect timing and accuracy, she hobbles you and you have to use these rockets in the environment to stun her enough to catch up to her and perform a grab that ends the game. At least this one doesn't have a countdown timer to kick you in the cybernads like everything else. On the road again! Wait, what happened to the graphics? Kate, your awesome PS2 face, it's gone! Huh. You know, I noticed that the character models got markedly worse in the sequences set in present day in T3 Redemption, and the third-person on-foot shooting is nowhere to be seen anymore. You can get out of your vehicle, sure, but you can't finish the mission if you do. Okay, I'm putting the puzzle together. My hunch is that this was an arcade-only rail shooter that at some point in development mutated and grew. They added the future war and third-person shooting elements later on to make it more marketable for console players, because people wouldn't be attracted to a Terminator racing game. But you could almost disguise it as a Terminator Grand Theft Auto game if you're tricky enough. Yeah, look at that. These shooting and melee mechanics in the third-person sequences almost feel tacked on. The shooting is so simple and the melee mechanics are so easy. You just walk up and mash buttons and it does all sorts of random combos to completely helpless, stun-locked enemies. It's not super engaging to play, but it does look cool. Cool enough to put it in the game trailer to make people think this isn't 80% a racing game with rail shooting mechanics. Much like Rise of the Machines, this game also hits a point of resistance with finding usable scenes from the movie to fit its gameplay format at this same place in the plot. That one had the flashback to add an extra Future War level at pretty much the same point in the story here. Here there's a cutscene where instead of fighting in a bathroom and groping each other, the Terminators end up in a particle accelerator chamber, which is somehow a functional time machine in the year 2003, and the TX sends Honey Bitch into an alternate future where Skynet has killed 100% of humanity. And would you know it? The graphics look amazing again! Even though this is the hardest bullshit segment of the game, it looks great. This is some kind of Frankenstein's monster of like 2 different games fused together. I'm so fascinated by how this came to be that I have to know more. What happened? Between the 2 Terminator 3 games, I'd say this one's better made on a technical level, but the other one was more enjoyable if only because it was easier to get through. Though, it's been very fascinating watching 2 teams tackle the same material and game format in such different ways. Can you imagine if some modder out there had the ability to splice these 2 together into one massive game that has all these scenes? The engines and assets are probably too different to be compatible, and there's definitely spots where you'd have 2 versions of the same set piece and it'd be too difficult to choose which one to use. Either way, I just think that this little anomaly in the history of movie tie-in games is really interesting because it's so uncommon and certainly not something we'll ever see happen again in this industry.
You are terminated.
You know what's weird? They changed his one-liner in both games.
Eat me. Game over.
At least in this version, they had John go snag Honey Bitch's CPU card so he could be resurrected as this monstrosity.
No problemo.
So at least in one universe out there, Honey Bitch lived on to terminate another day and tell Skynet to talk to the hand. Oh no! He doesn't have hands anymore! Terminator Salvation, developed by Halcyon Games and Grin. Oh boy, this one's really rough. You know, of every Terminator movie that's come out in my lifetime, the one that I felt had the most defined and memorable aesthetic was Terminator Salvation. I remember the hype surrounding the movie so vividly, with the action figure commercials, the role-play toys, trailers for this game, and of course, the distinct look of the movie itself. I can still see so clearly in my mind's eye the hulking T-600s with their tattered clothes and rubber skin, amid a backdrop of ruined buildings or sun-baked desert. To this day, I feel like it's the only post-T2 movie that was actually memorable in any way on a visual level, even if they eschewed the blue-tinted ocean of skulls and chrome combatants from the previous Future War flash-forwards. I always assumed had this gotten a trilogy, they would have evolved into that look as the movies went on and the technology on both sides of the war became more advanced, going from bullets to lasers. Alas, this game still looks like any other generic brown shooter so characteristic of this period in gaming. This was right on the tail end of movie tie-in games when those were still kind of a thing. When people were getting wise to them, consistently being rushed and sloppy to release alongside their respective movies. Actors were probably getting sick of recording the voiceover for these things because I noticed a lot less of them were doing it near the end.
So, tell me about the rabbits. Tell me about the rabbits.
And this sure doesn't look like Christian Bale. They got Common, though. You guys like Common? This isn't an adaptation of the movie. Instead, it's a prequel story about John Connor meeting some of the side characters from Salvation, like Blair and Barnes. If you're frothing at the mouth for more in-depth Blair lore, there's also a short machinima series about her, using this game's assets and gameplay. Who could forget that memorable character who did so many things? If this game were actually cool, it would have you also meet Justin Perry and Catherine Luna and make Dawn of Fate canon just for fun. But instead, you get all these resistance fighters that just shout at the Terminators like drunken frat boys.
How about that? Come on, learn to shoot, people. One more close call like that, and I'll need to change my shorts, alright?
Say what you will about Dawn of Fate, I felt like the human resistance in that game were a classy outfit. I believe those guys were professionals and had a chance at beating Skynet. Huh. I guess the palm trees survived the nuclear Armageddon. Actually, why does this look so planty? I do kind of like the concept and sentiment of this game's story, though. The plot is about John and Blair going on a dangerous solo mission to save a handful of wounded soldiers who are trapped in a Skynet-controlled territory, and how they pick up and even lose a few allies along the way. No time travel, no doomsday, no infiltrating the Skynet system core. You're just risking your ass to save 3 guys who were left behind. It's a really grounded and low-stakes story, and I think it takes place in real time over about 2 or 3 hours, which thankfully means this game is also very short because... Woof! You'd think getting to the PS3 era would mean that gameplay is a lot more complex and detailed, but honestly, there's not much to talk about here. It's a pretty standard covered-based third-person shooter. but it's pretty janky and poorly designed. There's a whole laundry list of reasons this game's tedious to get through, all stemming from busted controls and bad design choices. There's no standard sprint or combat roll, just this leisurely little jog that induces an obnoxious camera bob that's possibly supposed to make the gameplay look more intense and action-heavy than it really is. When you hide and cover, a good game would allow you to back off of it with the left analog stick in case enemies get too close while you're shooting. But in this case, you're glued to the cover until you stop aiming, then press the button to detach and wait for the animation to play, which has led me to my death a few times. There are about 5 or 6 weapons total in the entire game, none of which are very good at anything except the rocket launcher because the enemies are so damn spongy, unless you flank them and hit this weak spot on their back. And even then, hit detection with certain weapons is pretty spotty in some cases. The game never tells you how to switch grenade types, so I had to look it up online. The L1 and D-pad buttons are completely unassigned, which makes me think there must have been cut mechanics because this is a rush job.
Look, survivors.
Guys,
We're with
why aren't
the
you shooting?
Do you need help?
Guys, are you fucking kidding me? He's 8 feet tall and one-arming a Gatling gun. How do you not see that he's a Terminator? Jesus! I guess the human resistance is composed of people who fall for phishing emails and think AI images on Facebook are real. Bunch of morons. The other killer is that enemy fire, whether it hits you or not, makes your camera sway extremely far to the side when it impacts, and sometimes when you're aiming they'll shoot near you and your reticle just jerks to the side. The aiming is already feeling really stiff, but this makes it a nightmare. T-600s soak up a ridiculous amount of punishment. True to canon, the best way to hurt them is with the pipe bombs, because they can even survive direct hits from RPGs from time to time. So while I do have to commend them for never making a single Terminator feel trivial to fight, the ones you do encounter are more annoying than threatening. Though this spider tank thing is the most common enemy in the game. You'll be fighting more of these than anything else, and it gets old really fast.
Skin job, run!
Careful, got a skin job after us.
They keep calling them skin jobs in this mission. That's either the writer of the script being a big nerd, or somehow the movie Blade Runner was released in the Terminator universe. Both are fun. Some of the new machines in Salvation were really cool, like those motorcycle drones that could drive in either direction. And I always thought the Harvester was terrifying. I want to fight that thing, but their appearances in this game are unremarkable. You fight the Cycles in one of 3 back-to-back turret sections. The Harvester shoots at you from 2 blocks away, and you just run away and never see it again. And the game crashes a lot. The closest thing to a boss fight is shooting an RPG at an aerial HK in 2 spots, but that's really easy. I guess there's a turret section where you're commandeering one of the big HK tanks near the end and having to shoot towers. Okay, it's an on-the-rail sequence in this tank, and it's a turret section with a red filter. We're running out of stuff now. We've officially started repeating gimmicks. Levels are extremely linear to the point that it feels like they could have just made a rail shooter instead. You're always boxed into a hallway being herded from room to room. The only way to restore your health is to complete the enemy encounter. Once the last bot falls, you're back to 100%. So get used to getting stuck in a random encounter for a long time because you have no way of healing yourself. Yeah, I don't know, man. Just stay away from this one. It's the least interesting one I've covered so far. It's clunky and barely functional and doesn't offer much to talk about. I like the movie Terminator Salvation, not for all the things that it isn't, but for all the things that it is. It was a genuine attempt to keep the series moving forward instead of just looking backward and trying to recreate their greatest hits over and over. It's definitely got its flaws, but god damn it, it was trying to do new things too, and some of them were pretty cool. But the studio behind it folded from a lot of mismanagement and they had to sell the rights to the franchise to survive. So the sequel to Salvation would never come. And this game is barely holding together and doesn't really do justice to any of the cool stuff that Salvation brings to the table. But this one sure does. Fuck it, why not just make it a rail shooter? There's no shame in that. Rail shooters are cool. Terminator Salvation, the arcade game by Raw Thrills, the same developer as Aliens Armageddon, another favorite of mine, is way better than the console version.
If you live in the States, you've probably seen this beauty in a Dave & Buster's, Chuck E. Cheese, movie theater lobby, or your local arcade. It's a classic. It makes much better use of the various enemy types from the movie, including those spiky aquatic bots too. Spider robots from the console game appear, but there's more variety overall because they have the T-1s from the third movie, these little facehugger bots that crawl in hordes, and HK tanks. The Harvester is a massive boss that chases you through the whole level, and you get to actually spend time fighting it instead of ducking into a tunnel like a bitch. Come on, Connor! Kick his 5-story tall ass! I want Skynet to get desperate enough to just make a Terminator the size of a city that can swat F-16s from the sky and use a death ray from its eyes. Bigger robots! Dumber robots! I command you! The character models look fantastic. This game's graphics evoke the look of the film much better, and it feels so much more like an explosive blockbuster. I'd say if you're looking for a Terminator Salvation experience in game form, this should be your go-to. I play this all the way through every chance I get when I see one of these cabinets out in the wild.
I got really excited at the thought of coming face to face with a T-800 metal skelly face through the power of virtual reality. Unfortunately, Terminator Guardian of Fate is not available on home VR headsets like the MetaQuest or PSVR. Instead, it is a Dave & Buster's exclusive VR experience that's no longer available in D&B locations. I reached out to their customer service in hopes of getting a list of locations that have this VR experience, and they very cordially responded. Here's what they said. "Hi Diego, we hope this email finds you well. Thanks for reaching out to Guest Relations with your inquiry about the Terminator VR game. Regretfully, we have removed all of these games from our locations as we did not renew the license with the manufacturer. We regret any inconvenience that this may have caused you." Well, there goes any chance of me being prepared for the future, War.
Terminator, that really great series that Insomniac abandoned. I was really hoping this series would have its own Alien Isolation. Like, after countless tries, a bunch of really hardcore fans of the franchise got together and figured out what it needed that none of the cinematic sequels provided, and then just put that out in game form. Finally, a good one! Well, I think this is that for Terminator. You play as a resistance soldier named Jacob Rivers in the Future War, trying to survive the robot assassins gunning for his head and keep his allies alive. Blue smoky wasteland, piles of skulls, plasma weapons and all. So this even checks the boxes that Salvation didn't for an entry into the Terminator mythos set exclusively in the future. Be warned, I will be spoiling this one a little bit, but I do recommend you play it for yourself. It's worth it for that incredible final mission. Immediately, this game draws comparisons to the other post-nuclear hellscape gamers are so familiar with. This is Fallout Light. There are plenty of the same mechanics like the lockpicking, hacking, trading scavenged resources, and dialogue trees. Even the skill point system evokes a comparison. But these systems, while extremely similar, lack the same depth and nuance of their Bethesdian brethren. The upgrades are a lot more basic and don't offer you a way to customize a very specific playstyle due to the game's much more linear structure. I ended up getting to the max level and got all the upgrades except for 3 for crafting items. But it was fine since I was good at scavenging everything I needed. A steel pipe with an elbow joint at the end of it is typically the most devastating weapon of all time, but even that is garbage compared to the metal warriors of the future. It's like they're just made of steel pipes with elbow joints. Ugh. The combat has a stiff learning curve. Very quickly, you'll understand why Kyle Reese was frustrated with the shitty armaments of 1984, because bullet-based weapons are terrible for damaging almost all types of Terminators, especially the endoskeletons. This too makes sure that every chrome skeleton son of a bitch is a serious hazard to encounter, and you spend nearly the entire game feeling outgunned and outclassed. But fear not, there's hope yet. There's a scene in Salvation where Kyle uses a shiv to disable a Terminator by stabbing it in the base of the skull, so that's actually a strategy here. The knives are single use, but it's something. If you're smart, you can set traps, use the environment to your advantage, and stay hidden to outsmart the machines. You can even hack turrets by playing a quick game of Cyber Frogger and then let them fight your battles for you. Alright! I think I'm finally getting the hang of it. Oh my god, what is that?!
I cursed myself by asking for more big robots, because that's as big as a house. That reminds me, a lot of enemy types across these games feel like references to each other. Playing these one by one like I did, you'll see a lot of the same robots over and over, and it's kind of cool how it makes them all feel like a series instead of a half-dozen random reboots, which they pretty much are. These damn games are more consistent than the movies, but that's a pretty low bar. There's even a story DLC chapter set in the middle of a time skip in the main campaign where you fight a bunch of old T-600s that look like they did in Salvation. The coppery colors, rubber skin, and they're carrying guns with bullets instead of plasma. I'm a sucker for continuity details like that, and I appreciate the thought put into it. Though I don't know if I would have put this much work to ascribe a backstory to Kyle getting the photo from the movie. I think it was just simpler when John handed it to him. These maps are populated with a healthy variety of enemies, but also Skynet outposts where they store power supplies. They're huge, maze-like, and heavily fortified. Taking these on is a blast. I love the challenge of infiltrating and clearing these out of enemies and then setting them to detonate. It really gives you that feeling of being a scrappy underdog in the Resistance, sabotaging these compounds full of evil robots like all the Future War scenes showed.
Living tissue would make you a cybernetic organism, not a robot. Words have meaning.
There's only really a handful of encounters I'd classify as a boss fight. The first one being a one-on-one battle with a T-850 in a human skin sent from the future to kill you. He's not much different than any other Terminator, just more resistant to damage. Resistant. The other is Rivers having to take down an HK tank from the ground using rockets while waves of smaller enemies come at you. It's simple, but it's still fun, and the music kicks ass. I did feel a great sense of progression as I went along. I started as a glass-jawed, noodle-armed wimp getting batted around by death machines like a jingly cat toy. But by the end of the game, I boosted my stats, ate my Wheaties, got plenty of exercise, and my body became a machine that turns other machines into broken machines.
I am the rock of the eternal shore. Crash against me and be broken.
Oh my god, it's Francis from Left 4 Dead. And Eli Vance from Half-Life. Wow! Along the way, your endearingly dead-eyed ragtag group of survivors will tell you their backstories and give you some side quests to gain their trust. And they'll A-pose as a sort of future meme. We don't understand this in our time period, but this is hilarious in the future year of 2028. And if you avoid the pitfalls of potentially hilarious dialogue from being a rude dick for no reason, you'll gain their friendship and loyalty, and two of them you can even romance for some awkward video game sex. Your boss, Commander Baron, asks you to murder an innocent man that she personally dislikes about 10 seconds before offering to sleep with you, and the whole exchange is real fucking awkward.
I need you to get rid of Mac. You look shocked, but I think I can find a way to persuade you. If you're into it, that is.
Thanks. I'll stick with the nice wasteland scavenger lady who killed her dad with a shotgun. She's not perfect, but she doesn't force me to change. Aw, man. This makes me nostalgic for Mass Effect. Alright, see ya, champ. Oh. Oh, shit. Hey, guys. Were you standing there this entire time? Did you just hear the... Oh, God. Well, thank you for not interrupting. These optional side quests encourage you to go off the main road a bit and explore these gorgeously detailed environments. This isn't a true open-world game, and that's fine by me, because I'm getting sick of every game needing massive open-world environments or gamers accuse the devs of being lazy. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'd rather have a tightly designed, straightforward level than a map the size of a small continent with nothing to do in it. Even then, these levels are still huge, with a great amount of playable space to explore for hidden supply caches and find items to bring your civilian pals back at base camp, or just find some cool bits of lore tying this back to the movies. They're generally not common or in your face, so it's a nice treat when you see stuff like that. I go into a hospital where Terminators are experimenting on captured Resistance fighters and see a note in this old broom closet, implying this is the same facility where Sarah Connor was being mentally evaluated by Dr. Silberman, You can also find the body of a Resistance soldier who was experimented on, and oh shit! It's the brother of the lead singer of Filter. Now we know where Skynet got that face from. The funniest possible twist in this game would be Skynet stealing some of Jacob Rivers' DNA, but he escapes and the camera finally breaks off into a third-person view and he looks like this. Nah, you're just some guy, but a damn important one, as infiltrator units try and take you out and a mysterious Spanish weapons merchant guides you towards the best outcome of events.
Got some rare things on sale, stranger. What are you buying?
This has multiple endings, but it's really easy to get the best one on your first playthrough if you listen to the obvious future man over here. And once you've sabotaged enough of Skynet's resources and tossed their war efforts back a decade or two, you're promoted and brought into the fold to meet the man himself, Johnny Con! Oh my god, I'm the cameraman from this scene in T2! John Connor actually takes some time to talk to you and answers all of your burning questions at once because he's got a cheat guide for this whole war from his parents, and then he lets you lead the final assault on Skynet because you're so cool. After getting your ass handed to you the entire game, it's time for some payback. I guess the System Core and Time Machine are in LA this time, but the final level of this game is like a companion piece to Dawn of Fate's final level. This is so cathartic, it feels like an epic finale to the Terminator saga. Enemies that used to make you shudder with fear are now trampled underfoot like tinfoil. Even the giants stand no chance anymore. Quick, John! Use Honey Bitch's CPU card on this one. We have to make Redemption's ending canon. We're so close to greatness! The music slaps. The spectacle is incredible. The emotions run high. This one has it all. And this is the most enjoyable experience I've had playing any of these games so far for this video. It's only fitting that I played this one last. To me, Terminator Resistance is the real conclusion to the franchise. It's better at following up T2 than any movie ever has been. But it doesn't get lost in the minutia of bullshit fan service and reliving iconic moments. Instead, it has that stuff just kind of as set dressing for its own thing. It creates some of its own iconic moments. It's a little buggy, and the graphics aren't always up to that ridiculous AAA standard, but hey, this is still an all-timer. It's worth your attention. While playing as a bulletproof war machine is fun, I think the real satisfaction lies in using your wits and cunning as a human being to outmaneuver and overcome even the deadliest machine science can create. And this game has that in spades. Check it out.
A couple years ago, I covered a real-time strategy game for our Every AVP Game Reviewed, and after struggling with it, I told myself that I would try to get into the RTS genre and play more of them to better understand them. Well,
I lied.
I have played exactly 0 strategy games since Aliens vs Predator Extinction, and because of that, I got my ass absolutely kicked in Terminator Dark Fate Defiance. This game takes place in the same timeline as the movie that shares its name, so there's no Skynet here. You command an army of all sorts of specialists against the Chromeheads known as Legion. Even though this game doesn't have any recognizable characters from the movies, it did a pretty good job of captivating me with its story. The tone of the bleak and hopeless future is pulled off really well in just the opening moments in this game's tutorial. The voice actors here do a really good job with what they're given. Since the game is devoid of any cutscenes, the voice actors have to do a lot of legwork to deliver those poignant moments. Sometimes certain characters may come off as a bit cartoony with how exaggerated their performances are, but I was still impressed with how well the game has managed to captivate me with the story I've experienced so far.
Sergeant Mason, I'm sorry. I know he was your friend.
Congratulations, sir! You got your big one first time out. Really earned your spurs.
We'll talk about this back at base, Sergeant.
Yes, sir. We surely will.
As someone who's still very much a beginner to strategy games, going into Dark Fate was both exciting and daunting. As you'd expect, the game revolves around commanding your units, managing resources, and coming up with the best tactical approach to missions on the fly, and with the pressure of the Legion on your ass. The game offers a ton of tutorial pop-ups and an encyclopedia to reference if you ever need to refresh your memory on certain aspects of the game. And a lot of times I was experiencing information overload. I don't know if a lot of this game's mechanics and systems are standard for RTS games, so maybe someone who's experienced with this genre jumps into this already getting the gist of it. You know, like I've played a bunch of first-person shooters, and I know that right trigger is shoot and circle is probably gonna be crouch. Is that how it is for RTS gamers? The game has a staggering amount of depth. When you're out in the field, you can command your units to move in certain formations, change their behavior to be more offensive or defensive, and withhold them from using certain weapons they have equipped, to name a few things. Trial and error was the name of the game for me. There were times when I had approached an enemy encampment with a variety of different soldiers with different weapons, only to end up being a shit stain on the pavement. I found that taking my time and strategically pushing forward by moving from building to building was the best strategy. Having your units infiltrate a structure provides them with cover and significantly increases your chances of winning a battle against any enemies in the perimeter. Sometimes a building or house will already be populated by enemies, and sending your units will force them to engage in close quarters combat. And the outcome of the battle will depend on those particular units' skill with CQC, their condition, and just the number of units you sent in. It's really satisfying seeing the enemy units dwindle and be completely overpowered by your army when claiming a building. During missions, you'll often be presented with opportunities to do side quests, and these are a massive game changer because they'll often reward you with reinforcements, vehicles, or ammo supplies that can very quickly change the tide of a battle. This is where things can get a bit overwhelming though, because you can quickly find yourself with multiple missions going on at once at separate ends of the map, and if you're not multitasking and prioritizing effectively, things can get out of control very fast. In between missions, there's a whole army management system where you resupply your troops with ammo, upgrade their abilities, and hire mercenaries from outposts if you're running low on units. Just about anything you do costs a particular type of currency though, even traveling to different parts of the map. Before you head out, the game will let you know how many days it'll take to reach your destination, and the farther something is, the more supplies it'll use up from your reserve. This kind of thing is stressful to me. I'd hate to starve my people because I didn't do a good job of managing supplies. So I guess the game does a good job of making you feel the depression and anxiety that comes with living in a post-apocalyptic world. Overall, Terminator Dark Fate Defiance is a game I can see myself enjoying as I become more comfortable with the strategy genre. It can be frustrating at times. Seriously, the last time I played it for 6 hours straight and got like 3 missions done. Despite that, developing strategies is engaging and seeing them play out successfully is rewarding. I look forward to spending more time with this game and sharpening my skills. Maybe then I'll be ready for Aliens Dark Descent. No, I haven't forgotten about you.
Unfortunately, it's impossible for us to future-proof these videos, seeing as how most of these franchises will continue to make reboots, revivals, and reimaginings until the sun turns red and swallows the solar system. Hell, since the Aliens games video, 2 more full Aliens games have come to console, and G-Man Lives ripped us off. But that's okay, we're ripping him off right now too, and kinda did with the Evil Dead video as well. No one owns these topics, but I do think it's funny that we've entered an arms race over who can play more mediocre movie tie-in games in the least amount of videos. We've covered more games per video, but his view counts are kicking our asses. The nuclear option is to just make a 6-hour video about every Star Wars game before he can do it. Also, he probably has no idea we exist, but I think a completely one-sided rivalry with a far more successful YouTuber is really funny. All that being said, even long after this video, there's still going to be more Terminator video games and guest appearances, with 2 already on the horizon that we know of. The T-1000 will be entering the continuity rebooting world of Mortal 1 Combat sometime soon in the new Combat Pack, and I'm just most excited for Peacemaker confusing him for his dad, or the T-1000 thinking Conan the Barbarian is actually Uncle Bob. Well, I don't mean to be a hater this early on, but everything I've seen or heard about Terminator Survivors sounds kinda bland. There's that god-awful cinematic trailer scored by a cringy country song about Skynet, and then there's the early featurette explaining the concept. It really sounds like everything they're describing is really redundant and exactly what Terminator Resistance just pulled off. And all of this concept art and early looks at the environments look worse at capturing the future war aesthetic from the first 2 movies, despite that being explicitly the vibe they're going for. Plus, I'm just tired of every movie franchise getting turned into an asymmetrical multiplayer game that's going to shut down within a year. That wound will never close. It doesn't sound like this is one of those, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's what it ends up being. But hey, it's still a long ways out, and I haven't seen a single second of gameplay, so I should probably stop being so judgy and just let them cook. Maybe it'll be awesome, and I'll feel stupid for doubting.
Mobile Games Lightning Round. Oh god, I thought I was done with these. The 2003 Terminator mobile game is yet another rail shooter that runs at a snail's pace. Each button on the number pad shoots a different section of the screen, and this is just not fun and it doesn't work well. Next! Terminator, I'm back. Alright, now this is something more suitable for a flip phone. This is a top-down shooter where you play as Kyle Reese taking on different missions. You work your way up the screen, running from cover to cover, blasting away Terminators. It's weird how much of the screen your inventory takes up, but they managed to make it work with how vertical this game is laid out. Next! Terminator Revenge is pretty cool. It's a solid 2D platformer shooter where you straight up play as a bad guy. You're sent back in time by Skynet and your mission is to wipe out the Resistance and sabotage any vital information they have on Skynet to prevent them from getting the upper hand in the future war. I like how the Terminator is wearing a red shirt under his leather jacket. It kind of reminds me of that old Kenner toy. Terminator Genesis Revolution. God, how many generic movie subtitles can you throw in there? Why don't you add Chronicles for good measure? Oh wait, you already did that one. This one's been delisted and I'm kind of bummed by that because it looks like a pretty cool cover shooter. Granted, you don't have full control of your character, you're locked into place, it probably would have gotten repetitive pretty fast, and it looks like the type of game that asks you to grind monotonously to upgrade your weapons or pay up. Gross. Next. Terminator Genesis. Oh wait, god, there's another one of these? How badly were they trying to push this movie? Terminator Genesis Future War is just the worst kind of video game there is. You tap, tap, tap away through different menus, claiming daily quests, upgrading components, and collecting PNGs of generic techie icons. God, I can't stand these kinds of games. Let's stop making these. Get it away. Terminator Dark Fate is indeed a game that suffered a dark fate because you can't play it anymore. You can still download it off the App Store, but you'll be perpetually stuck in this loading screen staring at Mackenzie Davis's bold cut. It doesn't look like we're missing out on much anyway. This is yet another typical mobile game slop slowly made to promote the movie. It's a strategy game where you place down turrets, deploy soldiers, and build up your pace, all the while littering your screen with pop-ups for microtransactions. Thanks, but no thanks. Mobile game lightning round over. Man, I love Broforce, the macho-fueled Saturday morning cartoon-style key art juxtaposed against the miniaturized and pixelated characters seen in the actual gameplay. The explosive and fast-paced gameplay is quite literally a blast. I actually based my channel's aesthetic on this game. By the way, check that out when you get the chance. Link to my channel down in the description. Okay, thank you. So yeah, I'm very fond of this game if you couldn't tell. Broforce is a love letter to the testosterone-fueled, protein-absorbing, and other performance-enhancing unnamed substances injected into our action heroes of the 80s. Being the most prominent figure of this era, Arnie has the most bros based on characters he's played in different movies. You've got Bro Mando, Bronan, the Brobarian, and of course the Brominator. His weapon is the iconic minigun from Terminator 2, and holy shit, this thing packs firepower. It decimates anything in its way, but it's offset by how uncontrollable the recoil of this bad boy is. So much so that it pushes you in the opposite direction you're firing. It's pretty hilarious. Players actually use this as a tactic to speedrun levels, and I gotta say, it's pretty handy. Brominator's special ability has him shedding his human disguise and becoming impervious to all damage. Well, except falling, but that'll get anyone, you know? Broforce is such a cool idea for a video game. I'd love it for it to be a continuously updated platform that keeps adding action heroes. It recently got an update called Broforce Forever, which, judging by the name, kinda makes me feel that that could be a possibility, but what contemporary action heroes are there to add? John Wick? Reacher? The Rock? No thanks, just give me more Arnie alts. Give me Turbo Man. Give me fucking Kindergarten Cop.
As a tie-in for the ill-fated Dark Fate, the T-800, Old Lady Sarah Connor, Cyborg Pal Grace, and the Rev 9 all appear as playable characters in Gears 5 multiplayer. It's a shame that Dark Fate was nothing much to write home about, but maybe it'll help finally kill the god-awful subgenre of movies known as the Legacy sequel. Hey kids, all your favorite movie heroes got a satisfying and definitive ending for around 5 minutes before being horrifically traumatized, and then they spent the next 40 years as depressed reclusive failures before meeting the hip young new cast to pass the torch to. God damn. You deserve better, little Johnny.
Haven't we done this before?
I have no record of a previous encounter.
We have met. I am sure of it.
That could mean a couple of things. You knew he'd be here. Mortal Kombat has become Smash Bros. For Gen X 80s action heroes and horror villains. And the Terminator is a bit of both. His default skin is styled after Carl from Dark Fate with more aged outer shell, but the machine inside is still good as new as he shotguns and pummels the more mortally challenged competition. Special thanks to the Fourth Snake for getting footage of him in a more classic T2 inspired look, because I hate this game's costume system. I hate Gear. I'm so tired of Gear. It's cool that they got his likeness right, but the sound alike for his voice isn't the best, which can be a little distracting.
I have found you again. I must achieve your termination.
Everyone in the world can mimic that thick Austrian accent, but few can sound authentic to the man himself. So while the voice is more on the Rainier Wolfcastle side, it's still cool to see him here. If certain requirements are met in a match, his skin is burned away, revealing the endoskeleton beneath for a partial resurrection to take down the opponent. You ever notice how they don't talk anymore once this happens? He's got a cool fatality for sending the opponent to the future war to let other T-800s take care of them. I wish YouTube would let us show Red Blood. That really sucks. You play as Tom Clancy and his ghost friends as they encounter... Oh, fuck off! They removed these levels too? Timed event? Why is games preservation so bad? Ugh, we can't play this one, so here's someone else's footage. These facial animations are as lifeless as the Terminator franchise after 2010. Yowza!
Hey, she wouldn't shut up about the future and the end of the world. We couldn't wait to get rid of her. Please, that's all I know.
Tom Clancy is sent on a mission to save a POW from an enemy territory, but she reveals that she's a rebel from the future that was sent back in time to build Tom Clancy a gun that could kill Terminators. A bunch of T-800s that couldn't afford Arnold's likeness are in hot pursuit, however, to make Tom Clancy into the very ghost he recons.
Skynet, about 40 years from now. You're saying this came from the future? One possible future.
Why the hell should I believe any of this?
You saw that thing!
I like how Tom Clancy thinks the concept of a robot from the future is ridiculous and insane, even though he already killed a space predator in Wildlands. The T-800 is a sort of mini-boss enemy type that pursues you while taking no damage at all until you get the right weapon. I think this first stretch of the DLC had such a great idea with an immortal pursuer enemy type, but then you start blasting them to pieces with a super armor-piercing future gun and it's sort of trivial again. It is cool how the Tom Clancy Ghost Adventures games include these crossovers like a story mission with cutscenes and dialogue, instead of just a random, barely acknowledged weird thing spawning on the map. At one point, the machines even build their own factory on the island to mass-produce skinless robo-enemies to try and kill you even harder. After blowing up the factory, you let your future pal know that the robot apocalypse has been averted and she can go get a job and pay a mortgage now. At least until the other robot apocalypse happens and renders all this pointless. I lament the state of gaming, because this and the Predator crossover in these games are pretty cool, and it's a damn shame that this stuff is built with planned obsolescence in mind, and that's an industry standard practice. It would have been fun to play these, but alas, they're gone forever, and I didn't even know they existed until making these videos years later.
I'll be back.
I'll be waiting.
Similar to Behavior Games' other asymmetrical multiplayer juggernaut, Death Garden Blood Harvest is a post-apocalyptic 5v1 battle between survivors, jumping and climbing around like ninjas to avoid one Halo guy trying to steal their blood as part of some get-rich-quick scheme in their dystopian culture, I guess. One of the hunters added to the game was a T-800 that's mission is to stalk and terminate all these pacifist Assassin's Creed guys. Apparently this game was shut down for a little while, but I think it's back now, and hopefully doing better numbers this time around. I don't know. The Fortnite-ification of Call of Duty over the last few years has been funny to watch as an outside observer. They keep adding all these colorful, cutesy weapon skins. But for a very limited time in 2021, realistic World War II simulator Call of Duty Warzone added the T-800 and T-1000 as character skins to use in online multiplayer. Unlike the Predator crossover back in the day, they're purely cosmetic and don't have any special stuff going on, but hey, it's still cool. Though it might be more exciting in a third-person game so you could actually see the cool robot you're playing as. It's a time-honored tradition to end each of these with a Fortnite skin. In 2021, the Future War set was added to the item shop and included Seymour Skinless over here and Sarah Connor. With the Crush robot hand as a back bling, Sarah looks great, but the T-800 comes with an inexplicable jetpack thing and a giant Terminator axe thingy. Can you imagine Arnie swinging this thing around in the Tech Noir and just decapitating a whole crowd of people? I do like this flaming thumbs up emote because it goes really well with Ghost Rider too. They probably travel in similar circles, maybe shop at the same store really. Later on, they added a proper, mostly disguised Terminator skin with a cartoonishly charming rendition of the Governator's likeness. I do appreciate the amount of options for the styles on the face. His pickaxe is more creative, being the torn-off blades from Peacemaker's dad, and he has the Hunter-Killer robot as a sick glider. The traversal emote has him riding the semi-truck from T2 with the old da-da-da-da-da blaring. If it was red, it would go great with Optimus Prime. You know, they definitely hung out once. Oh look, Sarah Connor and Ellen Ripley are in the same place at the same time. They can both talk about how much they think Michael Biehn is hot.
Look out! He's one of the 40%!
I'm gonna Phantom Tax this Beta's edging streak. Let me cook. Where we dropping, boys?
Good fucking riddance.